My parents handed my older sister a $13,000 luxury cruise and handed me a crumpled $2 lottery ticket. They told me I needed it for my retirement. 3 weeks later, my phone lit up with 79 missed calls from them. They had just found out that their little joke was worth $100 million. Before I tell you how I handled their sudden desperation, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to walk away from a toxic family to protect your peace. The crystal goblet chimed sharply against a silver butter knife, cutting through the low murmur of jazz playing in my parents' formal dining room. I sat at the far end of the sprawling mahogany table staring at the untouched roasted turkey on my plate. My mother Patricia stood at the head of the table wearing a silk emerald gown that likely cost more than my monthly rent. Her neck was draped in her signature pearls, perfectly coordinated with her immaculate blowout. She raised her glass high, her face flushed with the kind of arrogant pride she reserved exclusively for her favorite child. I want to make a toast to my beautiful daughter Jasmine and her brilliant husband Bradley, she announced, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings of the mansion. Marcus and I are just so incredibly proud of you both. Bradley, your new promotion at the firm is a testament to your outstanding work ethic. To celebrate this milestone, your father and I have arranged a little surprise. Jasmine, sitting to my right, gasped and clutched Bradley's arm. She was 34 years old, a former pageant queen who currently spent her days pretending to be a successful lifestyle influencer on the internet. Bradley, a 36-year-old finance bro with slicked back blonde hair and a perpetual smirk, wrapped his arm around her waist. He always made sure to pander to my parents, knowing exactly how to play the role of the perfect son-in-law to maintain his country club lifestyle. My mother pulled a thick embossed envelope from her clutch and handed it to them. We booked you the VIP suite on a Mediterranean cruise to Santorini. $13,000 of pure luxury for our favorite couple. You two deserve it. Jasmine shrieked with joy, throwing her arms around our mother. Bradley offered a smug toast to my father Marcus, who sat at the opposite end of the table swirling his expensive bourbon. I watched the entire exchange in silence. I was 31 years old working as a forensic accountant, but my family firmly believed I was nothing more than a struggling freelance bookkeeper. I never corrected them because keeping my true success hidden was the only way I could maintain my sanity in this house. Marcus set his drink down and reached into his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a small, colorful square of paper and tossed it across the length of the table. It fluttered in the air before landing directly on top of my cranberry sauce. I looked down. It was a crumpled $2 lottery scratch-off ticket. Since you are still doing that little freelance bookkeeping from your tiny apartment, Aaliyah, we figured you needed a retirement plan, my father said, his voice booming with malicious amusement. Scratch it. Maybe you can buy yourself a decent dessert since you clearly cannot afford to bring anything to dinner. The entire table erupted into laughter. Jasmine giggled, hiding her face behind her manicured hand, while my mother gave a theatrical sigh of pity. I looked at the grease-stained lottery ticket sitting on my plate. I was expected to smile. I was expected to nod. I was expected to swallow my humiliation, just like I had done every single holiday since I was a child. They always took pleasure in tearing me down to elevate Jasmine. They took my confidence. They took my voice. They took every opportunity to make me feel small. Bradley leaned across the table, his blue eyes glinting with condescension. You know, Aaliyah, if you ever want to step up and get a real corporate job, I could take some time out of my busy schedule to review your resume. My firm is always looking for entry-level data clerks. It is not much, but it pays better than whatever gig work you are doing right now. I picked up the lottery ticket and calmly wiped the cranberry sauce off the back with my linen napkin. I slid the ticket into my purse and looked directly into Bradley's smug face. The silence in the dining room stretched tight like a rubber band about to snap. Just like you reviewed my college applications, Bradley, I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low and completely steady. Oh, wait. That cannot be right. I got into Howard University on a full academic scholarship, while you failed your Series 7 licensing exam twice. I am not entirely sure I want career advice from someone who had to rely on his father-in-law's country club connections just to keep a junior associate position. The laughter died instantly. The heavy silence was absolute. Bradley's face turned a violent shade of red, his jaw clenching so hard I could see a vein pulsing in his neck. Jasmine gasped audibly, dropping her fork onto her porcelain plate with a loud clatter. Aliyah, my mother, shrieked, slamming her hand onto the table. Her pearls clicked against the wood. How dare you speak to your brother-in-law that way? He was offering you a favor out of the goodness of his heart. You have embarrassed this family since the day you decided to be difficult, and now you are ruining a celebration. You will apologize to Bradley right this instant. I did not yell. I did not cry. I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up. I looked at my mother, who was trembling with manufactured rage, and my father, who was glaring at me as if I were a stranger who had trespassed into his home. I grabbed my wool coat from the back of the chair. I do not think I will be doing that, I said smoothly. Enjoy your cruise, Jasmine. Enjoy the charity, Bradley. And thank you for the retirement plan, Dad. I turned my back on them and walked out of the dining room. I could hear my mother screaming my name, demanding I come back, but I did not stop. I walked through the grand foyer, opened the heavy oak front door, and stepped out into the freezing November night, leaving the suffocating toxic atmosphere of that house behind me. The biting wind cut through my coat as I hurried down the long winding driveway toward my car. I drove a vintage sedan, completely restored with my own money, an investment I kept quiet about to avoid my family's endless financial scrutiny. I unlocked the door, sliding into the freezing leather seat, and slammed the door shut. The isolation of the car was a profound relief after the suffocating heat of that dining room. My hands were shaking slightly, not from the freezing temperature, but from the residual adrenaline of finally speaking my mind. I sat there in the dark, taking deep breaths, trying to steady my racing heart. I reached into my purse to find my keys, and my fingers brushed against the crumpled lottery ticket. I pulled it out, holding it up to the dim glow of the street lamp overhead. It was a cheap, generic, holiday-themed scratch-off featuring little cartoon turkeys and dollar signs. A $2 joke meant to put me in my place. I reached into the cup holder console and found a silver dime sitting at the bottom. I did not even care about the game or the rules. I just needed a physical release for the frustration boiling in my chest. I pressed the edge of the dime against the foil coating and scratched aggressively. The silver dust flaked away, covering my lap in the center console. I scratched the first row. 3 matching symbols. I scratched the prize box next to it. It revealed a 50 times multiplier. I stopped breathing. I blinked hard, rubbing my eyes, thinking the dim light was playing tricks on my vision. I turned on the overhead dome light and looked closer. The print was small but undeniably clear. I scratched the rest of the coating away, revealing the grand prize amount printed boldly across the bottom. $100 million. I stared at the ticket in absolute shock. The numbers seemed to float off the cardboard. $100 million. It was not a joke. It was not a fake ticket. It was a genuine state lottery ticket, purchased by my father to humiliate me, and it had just made me wealthy beyond comprehension. A laugh bubbled up in my throat, a sound that was half disbelief and half pure hysterical joy. Suddenly, the bright screen of my phone lit up the dark car cabin. It buzzed loudly against the dashboard, vibrating with incoming messages. I picked it up. It was a text from Jasmine. Mom says, "Do not bother coming to Christmas unless you learn how to respect my husband. You always have to ruin everything because you are jealous of what we have. Grow up, Aliyah." I read the text message and then looked back at the lottery ticket in my hand. Jealous. That was the narrative they had always pushed. They believed I was jealous of Jasmine because they had given her everything while actively taking from me. The memory of my senior year of high school washed over me cold and sharp. I had worked tirelessly to build a college savings fund, working part-time jobs and saving every birthday check I ever received. My parents had promised to match my savings to help me pay for school. But when Jasmine got engaged, they emptied that joint account to pay for her extravagant wedding. They told me I needed to understand family priorities. They told me Jasmine needed a perfect day. They told me I could just take out student loans because I was smart enough to figure it out. She got the fairy tale. She got the string quartet. She got the ice sculptures. I got the student loan debt. I got the late nights crying over interest rates. I got the struggle. They took and they took. They took my patience. They took my peace. They took my college fund. And now they expected me to bow down and worship the very man who looked down on me. I locked my car doors, the mechanical click sounding incredibly loud in the quiet night. I smoothed the lottery ticket out against my steering wheel, ensuring the barcode and numbers were completely flat. I opened my phone camera and took 3 clear, high-resolution photographs of the front and back of the ticket. I uploaded the images to my secure encrypted cloud server, a habit ingrained in me from years of forensic accounting work. Then I opened my contacts and found the private number for Elaine, my senior legal counsel, and one of the most ruthless wealth management attorneys on the East Coast. I had retained her services 2 years ago when my independent consulting firm first started pulling in 7-figure contracts. She was expensive, discreet, and incredibly efficient. I pressed the call button. It rang twice before she answered. "Aaliyah," she said, her voice crisp and alert despite the holiday hour. "Is everything all right?" "Elaine," I said, my voice steady and cold. "It is Aaliyah. I need you to establish a blind trust immediately. I need maximum anonymity. No leaks, no public records tying my name to the entity. We need a corporate shell structure set up by Monday morning." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the sound of a keyboard clacking in the background. "Consider it done," Elaine replied. "What is the scope of the assets we are transferring into this trust?" I looked at the crumpled piece of cardboard sitting on my lap, the $2 joke that was about to change the power dynamic of my entire life. "I need to claim a lottery prize," I said. $100 million. And Elaine, I need to make absolutely sure my family never sees a single dime of it until I am ready to destroy them with it. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of calculated deception. On the surface, my life looked exactly the same. I woke up at 6 in the morning, put on my generic workout clothes, and grabbed my standard black coffee from the corner bodega. I sat at the small desk in my apartment, running forensic audits for my mid-level corporate clients. But beneath that ordinary facade, I was executing the most complex financial maneuver of my entire career. I spent my lunch breaks pacing the floor of my apartment with a prepaid burner phone pressed to my ear, speaking in hushed tones with Elaine. Elaine operated out of a glass-enclosed penthouse office that practically screamed corporate dominance. When I finally walked into her firm to finalize the paperwork, the contrast between my modest trench coat and the surrounding opulence was sharp. We sat across from each other at a massive marble conference table. Between us sat a stack of legal documents thicker than a phone book. "We have successfully routed the claim through the Delaware Corporate Registry," Elaine said, sliding the first document toward me. "The Apex Horizon Trust is now a fully formed legal entity. As the sole blind beneficiary, your identity is protected under layers of corporate shell companies. The State Lottery Commission will issue the payout to the trust, not to you personally. The taxes have been preemptively calculated, and the remaining capital will hit the offshore accounts by tomorrow morning." I picked up the heavy premium pen she offered. My hand did not shake as I signed my name. I felt an overwhelming sense of calm. The money was real. The power was real. But Elaine watched me with a sharp, assessing gaze. "I need you to understand the reality of what happens next, Aaliyah," she warned, her voice dropping to a serious octave. "I have managed sudden wealth transitions for years. 90% of lottery winners face aggressive lawsuits from their own blood relatives within the first 12 months. Family members will claim verbal contracts, broken promises, or implied partnerships. They will tear your life apart trying to get their hands on this capital. You need to be prepared for the fallout if your name ever leaks." I slid the signed non-disclosure agreement back across the polished marble. "I appreciate the concern, Elaine, but you do not know my family," I said. "They will never look my way. My family considers me a financial charity case. My father Marcus thinks I am a struggling freelancer who barely makes rent. My mother spends her days bragging to her country club friends about my sister Jasmine and her supposedly perfect husband Bradley. They are so consumed with funding Bradley's failing business ventures and maintaining their own fake image of wealth that they do not even see me as a real person. To them, I am a cautionary tale. They would never in a million years associate $100 million with the daughter they handed a $2 scratch-off ticket to as a joke. Elaine nodded slowly, sealing the documents in a secure folder. "Let us hope you are right," she said, "because the media is already circling like sharks." She was not exaggerating. By the end of the week, the entire city was caught in a relentless grip of lottery fever. Every local news channel ran segment after segment about the mystery winner. Reporters camped out in front of the rundown gas station where my father had purchased the ticket. They interviewed the cashier, the manager, and random customers. Speculation ran wild across social media. People guessed it was a secret tech billionaire or a lucky construction worker. I watched these broadcasts on the overhead televisions at my local gym while running on the treadmill. I watched them in the grocery store checkout line while carefully using digital coupons to buy my weekly produce. I walked through the city as a ghost hiding in plain sight. I was officially a centimillionaire, yet I maintained the exact lifestyle my family mocked me for simply to protect my anonymity. But secrets that massive have a way of demanding to be known. It happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at my dual monitor setup in my home office cross-referencing a particularly difficult tax ledger for a client. The television was murmuring quietly in the background, tuned to the local midday news. I was completely absorbed in the data until a breaking news graphic flashed bright red across the screen, catching my peripheral vision. I turned my chair toward the television. The news anchor leaned forward with an expression of intense excitement. He announced that the station had just acquired an exclusive lead on the mystery lottery winner. The owner of the gas station had finally released the exterior parking lot security footage to the press. My chest tightened. The air in my home office suddenly felt too thin to breathe. The broadcast cut to a grainy black and white security video. The timestamp matched Thanksgiving evening perfectly. The camera angle showed the side of the convenience store and the parking spaces directly in front of the glass doors. The news anchor narrated over the footage, stating that the winning ticket was sold exactly 2 minutes before the vehicle in the video pulled out of the parking lot. I stared at the screen in absolute horror. The footage was grainy, but the silhouette of the car was unmistakable. It was not a generic modern sedan. It was a fully restored vintage 1987 Mercedes-Benz with a distinct custom chrome trim along the rear bumper. It was the exact car I had spent 3 years meticulously restoring with my own money. It was the exact car my father had loudly mocked me for driving, calling it a rusty embarrassment during Thanksgiving dinner. It was the exact car parked in my driveway right outside my window at this very second. The anchor excitedly pointed out the custom rims and urged anyone in the city who recognized the unique classic car to call their tip line. The anonymity was completely shattered. There was no denying who owned that vehicle in my family circle. Before I could even reach for the remote control to mute the television, my personal cell phone vibrated violently against the wooden surface of my desk. The sudden noise made me jump. I slowly reached out and picked up the device. The screen was completely filled with notifications. My breath caught in my throat. The lock screen displayed a terrifying story. There were 79 missed calls. A relentless barrage of unread text messages stacked one on top of the other. 10 from Jasmine demanding to know where I was. 15 from my mother ordering me to answer the phone immediately. Countless missed calls from Bradley. As I stared at the overwhelming wall of notifications, the screen abruptly shifted. The notification banner vanished, replaced by an active incoming call screen. The phone vibrated. The phone vibrated relentlessly in the palm of my hand. I stared at the bright screen, watching the name flash against the dark glass. Dad. I swiped the green button and lifted the receiver to my ear without saying a single word. I simply stood in the center of my home office and listened to the heavy, frantic breathing on the other end of the line. "Aaliyah, baby." Marcus's voice boomed through the small speaker. It was a sickeningly sweet tone, a tone I had not heard directed at me in over a decade. It was the exact tone he used when he was trying to charm his way out of a bad business deal. "Why aren't you answering your phone? We saw the local news report. You won. The family won. We are coming over right now to celebrate with our favorite girl." I pulled the phone away from my ear, pressed the red end call button, and placed the device face down on my desk. I did not bother blocking his number. I wanted to see exactly how far they were willing to go now that they smelled money. My heart pounded a fierce rhythm against my ribs, but my mind was perfectly clear and cold. I walked into my kitchen, poured myself a glass of ice water, and waited. Exactly 5 minutes later, a violent pounding echoed through the hallway of my apartment building. It was not a polite knock. It was the aggressive, entitled hammering of people who believed they owned whatever was on the other side of that door. The wooden frame rattled under the force of their fists. "Aaliyah, open this door right now." My mother. Patricia shrieked from the hallway. Her voice was shrill and demanding. "We know you are in there." I set my glass on the granite counter. I walked slowly to the front door and twisted the deadbolt. Before I could even reach for the handle, the door was shoved inward with such force that the brass knob punched a dent into the drywall behind it. Marcus, Patricia, Jasmine, and Bradley stormed into my living space. They did not wait for an invitation or offer a greeting. They moved like a tactical strike team invading enemy territory. Their sudden presence instantly filled my modest apartment, bringing the suffocating, toxic energy of my childhood home right into my safe sanctuary. Patricia immediately wrinkled her nose as she stepped onto my clean but worn area rug. She looked at my carefully curated bookshelves and my secondhand sofa as if she had just stepped into a biohazard zone. "Well, thank God we can finally move you out of this absolute dump," Patricia said, tossing her heavy designer handbag onto my kitchen island as if she owned the place. I always hated driving to this side of town. The smell in these hallways is simply atrocious. But that is all in the past now. Pack a bag, Aaliyah. You are coming back to the estate with us tonight. I stood by the open door watching them swarm my home. "I am not going anywhere," I said, my voice calm and steady. "And you need to leave." Jasmine scoffed, crossing her arms tightly over her expensive cashmere sweater. "Stop being dramatic, Aaliyah. We are here to help you. You obviously do not know what to do with this kind of money." Dad saw the news report. "We saw your rusty vintage car pulling out of that gas station on the security footage. Do not try to deny it. You won the 100 million. I closed the front door slowly, letting the latch click into place. I did not deny it. I simply looked at the four of them standing in my living room, acting as if they had just struck oil in their own backyard. Bradley stepped forward, completely bypassing his wife and my parents. He unbuttoned his custom-tailored suit jacket, projecting the arrogant authority he always used to belittle me at family dinners. He reached into his sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers bound in a glossy presentation folder. "Listen carefully," Aaliyah, Bradley said, using his best patronizing corporate voice. "This is a very delicate financial situation. Sudden wealth syndrome ruins lives every single day. You are a basic freelance bookkeeper. You simply do not have the financial literacy or the emotional maturity to manage 9 figures. I have already taken the liberty of drafting a comprehensive investment portfolio for the winnings. We are going to establish a family trust under my direct management. I will make sure you receive a generous monthly stipend, so you never have to worry about making rent in this tiny place again." I looked at the folder in his manicured hand and then up at his smug face. "You want to manage my money, Bradley. Our money," Marcus corrected sharply, stepping up beside his son-in-law and puffing out his chest. "Do not get greedy, Aaliyah. I am the one who handed you that ticket. I paid for it. It was a family gift, which makes it family property. We are taking control of the assets to ensure they are protected and grown properly. Bradley knows exactly what he is doing." I let out a harsh laugh that echoed in the small room. Family property. That is absolutely fascinating. Just 3 weeks ago at Thanksgiving, you threw that ticket into my cranberry sauce and told me to use it to buy my own dessert. Just yesterday, Jasmine sent me a text message explicitly disinviting me from Christmas dinner because I did not show enough blind respect to your brilliant financial genius of a husband. Jasmine rolled her eyes, waving her hand dismissively in the air. "That was before we knew about the money. You are being completely unreasonable right now. We are family. We share everything. We protect each other. You owe us this. I owe you nothing, I fired back, taking a deliberate step toward my sister. You share everything, like how you shared my college savings account to pay for your extravagant destination wedding, like how mom and dad charged me rent the very week I turned 18 while letting you live at the estate for free until you were 26. You do not want to protect me. You want to siphon off my capital to fund your fake influencer lifestyle. Patricia gasped loudly, clutching the pearls at her throat in mock horror. How dare you speak to your sister that way? We put a roof over your head. We fed you. We raised you. You put a roof over Jasmine's head. I countered, my voice rising with years of suppressed anger. You provided for her. You just kept me around to make her look better by comparison. Bradley, clearly losing his patience with the conversation, closed the distance between us. He used his height and broad shoulders, trying to physically intimidate me into submission. He stood so close I could smell the expensive cologne he undoubtedly bought using my parents' credit cards. He looked down at me, his eyes narrowing into cold, calculating slits. Do not be selfish, Aaliyah Bradley commanded, his tone dropping into a dark, threatening register. We are not asking you. We are telling you. Hand over the ticket right now. We all know you are not smart enough to handle this kind of capital. You will just lose it all on stupid investments or get yourself sued into bankruptcy. Give me the ticket, and I will make sure you are taken care of. Do not make this harder than it needs to be. I did not back away. I did not shrink under his overbearing gaze. I looked straight into his arrogant blue eyes and felt a rush of absolute, untouchable power. I let a slow, icy smile spread across my face. I do not have the ticket, Bradley, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. Marcus frowned, stepping forward and raising his hands. What do you mean you do not have it? Did you hide it somewhere? Where is it, Aaliyah? Tell us right now. I did not hide it, I replied, my smile widening as I looked at each of their desperate, panicked faces. I do not have the ticket because it was cashed out yesterday. The silence in my living room lasted exactly 3 seconds before the entire space erupted into absolute chaos. My father stepped toward me with his hand outstretched, his face flushed a deep, dangerous purple. He was no longer the polished commercial real estate broker he pretended to be for his affluent friends. He was a desperate man, clawing at a lifeline slipping through his fingers. Give me the account routing numbers right now, Aaliyah, he shouted, his voice vibrating off the walls of my small apartment. You do not move that kind of capital without my authorization. That is family money. I bought the ticket. It belongs in the primary estate account. Transfer the funds this instant or so help me. I will call the bank myself and report the transaction as fraudulent. I looked at his outstretched hand and let out a sharp, fearless laugh. Call them, I challenged, taking a firm step forward instead of backing away. Tell the bank you want to report a legally claimed anonymous trust payout as stolen. Tell them you gave your youngest daughter a piece of trash as a Thanksgiving joke, and now you want to claim the punchline. Let us see exactly how fast their legal department hangs up on you. Before my father could respond, Jasmine let out a piercing, dramatic wail. She buried her face in her hands and collapsed onto my second-hand sofa, weeping with the practiced precision of a reality television star. She completely ignored the fact that she was wearing a designer coat she had likely purchased on credit. You are stealing from my future children, she sobbed, her voice muffled by her expensive manicure. Bradley and I were going to use that money to secure a real legacy. We have private school tuitions to think about and country club fees to maintain. You are taking food out of your own nieces' and nephews' mouths just because you are a bitter, lonely woman. You are an absolute monster, Aaliyah. My mother, Patricia, immediately rushed to Jasmine's side. She stroked her golden child's hair and glared at me with absolute venom. Look what you are doing to your sister, she snarled, her eyes flashing with rage. You have always been a selfish, difficult girl. We came here to save you from your own financial incompetence, and this is how you repay us, by hiding our money in some secret account like a common thief. Bradley stepped forward, trying to use his height and broad shoulders to intimidate me, just as he always did at family gatherings. He pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. You are playing a very dangerous game, Aaliyah, he warned, his voice dripping with condescension. You have no idea how corporate finance works. You are going to trigger a massive IRS audit and drag this entire family down with you. Open your laptop and initiate the wire transfer to my firm right now. I will fix this mess before you ruin us all. I pulled my phone from my back pocket and held my thumb hovering over the bright screen. I am giving you all exactly 10 seconds to get out of my home before I dial 911 and have you arrested for trespassing and home invasion. I spoke with a quiet, lethal intensity that cut right through Jasmine's fake sobbing and Bradley's corporate threats. Bradley sneered and scoffed loudly. Come on, Marcus, he muttered, grabbing my father by the arm. She is bluffing. She does not have the guts to call the cops on her own family. She is just trying to cause a scene. I tapped the keypad, pulling up the emergency dial screen, and turned the phone around so the bright white numbers faced them. Try me, I said softly. The genuine threat in my eyes finally registered. The arrogant masks slipped from their faces, replaced by genuine panic at the thought of a public police scandal ruining their precious country club reputation. My father shoved past me toward the hallway, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. He spun around at the threshold, his face twisted in pure, unapologetic rage. You owe us, he roared, his voice echoing down the quiet apartment building corridor. We put a roof over your head. We fed you. We raised you. You owe this family everything, and you are walking away like a traitor. I slammed my hand against the wooden doorframe, stopping him dead in his tracks. You put a roof over Jasmine's head, I fired back, matching his volume. You paid for her cars, her designer clothes, and her extravagant weddings. The day I turned 18, you handed me a lease agreement and charged me market-rate rent for my own childhood bedroom. You made me work 3 jobs to pay you every single month while she lived at the estate for free until she was 26. I do not owe you a single dime. I paid my debt to this family in full a long time ago. My mother gasped, clutching her chest, as if physically struck by the truth. Jasmine scrambled off the sofa and darted out the door, pulling her husband behind her. I shoved the heavy wooden door forward, slamming it shut an inch from my father's face. The deadbolt clicked into place with a satisfying heavy thud. I locked the chain and leaned my forehead against the cool painted wood, closing my eyes and exhaling a long, trembling breath. The silence of my apartment wrapped around me like a warm, protective shield. The nightmare was finally outside my walls, where it belonged. I walked into my kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, my hands finally steady. I had done it. I had faced them down and won. I took a slow sip, savoring the quiet victory. Then, a sharp, distinct chime broke the absolute silence of the room. I set my glass down and picked up my phone. A new email had just arrived in my primary inbox, marked with high importance. The sender was listed as the senior partner at Bradley's elite corporate law firm. I tapped the screen and felt my blood run ice cold as I read the subject line. Notice of pending litigation, verbal family lottery pool agreement. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, reading the absurd subject line over and over again. Notice of pending litigation, verbal family lottery pool agreement. Bradley wasted absolutely no time. He was striking while he assumed I was still reeling from their home invasion. I did not panic. I simply forwarded the entire email chain directly to Elaine and requested an emergency meeting for the following morning. The sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Elaine's penthouse office did nothing to warm the absolute chill in the room. The city moved silently beneath us, a sprawling grid of wealth and commerce, completely oblivious to the war being waged inside this glass box. We sat across from each other at her massive marble conference table, the very same spot where I had signed the trust documents just days prior. Elaine had printed out the entire legal notice Bradley had sent. The stack of crisp white papers sat between us, looking entirely too thick for a lawsuit based on a blatant lie. Bradley is exceptionally aggressive. I will give him that, Elaine said, adjusting her reading glasses as she scanned the top page of the brief. He is claiming that the Thanksgiving dinner constituted a legally binding verbal contract for a family lottery pool. His primary argument hinges on the fact that your father, Marcus, physically purchased the winning ticket with his own personal funds. Bradley's filing explicitly states that the ticket was presented as a shared family asset and therefore the winnings belong entirely to a family trust which your father controls. I leaned back in my heavy leather chair, crossing my arms tightly over my chest. He handed the ticket to me across a turkey carcass and loudly told me to use it to buy my own dessert, I said. There was no family pool. There was no verbal agreement. My sister Jasmine was too busy mocking my outfit to even look at the ticket when he tossed it at me. Elaine flipped to the next page, her expression remaining intensely professional and detached. It does not matter what actually happened in that dining room, Aaliyah. It only matters what they can convince a judge might have happened. Bradley has attached several digital exhibits to back up their fabricated narrative. Every single detail is calculated to portray you as an erratic, greedy beneficiary withholding shared family funds. They are building a highly coordinated, unified front against you. They are going to swear under oath that you agreed to split the money equally among the family members. They are going to swear under oath that you are the thief. They are going to swear under oath that they are the victims. I shook my head slowly, letting out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed in the cavernous office. They are so incredibly desperate, I murmured, staring at the forged documents. You have to understand the reality of my family, Elaine. My father is not just a greedy man looking for a quick payout. He is a drowning man. He is a desperate man. He is a dangerous man. He portrays himself as this untouchable titan of commercial real estate, but his business has been failing miserably for years. He over-leveraged himself on 3 massive suburban developments right before the market shifted. He has been secretly taking out high-interest private loans just to keep the lights on at his firm. My mother is quietly maxing out credit cards to maintain her country club membership, so her friends do not suspect a thing. They are millions of dollars in debt. This lawsuit is not just about asserting control over me. It is a desperate, aggressive maneuver to save his sinking ship before the bank forecloses on the family estate. He sees my $100 million as his personal bailout fund. He sees my $100 million as his salvation. He sees my $100 million as his property. Elaine removed her glasses and set them carefully on the marble table, her sharp, assessing gaze locked onto mine. That explains the extreme urgency of their actions, she said. But their desperation makes them highly dangerous, Aaliyah. Bradley is leveraging his firm's considerable resources to fast-track this litigation. He is not just filing a standard lawsuit. He is going for the jugular right out of the gate to cripple your ability to fight back. What exactly does that mean? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly even, despite the rising tension in my chest. It means he filed for an emergency injunction first thing this morning. Elaine explained, her tone deadly serious. Bradley is petitioning the court to immediately freeze all of your bank accounts. He is arguing that because you cashed the ticket out anonymously, you are a severe flight risk. He claims you are actively trying to hide family assets, and that a temporary freeze is the absolute only way to protect the capital until a judge can hear the full case. If the judge grants this injunction, and given Bradley's connections in the city, there is a very high probability that he will. Your financial access could be completely cut off by 5 o'clock this evening. You will not be able to buy a cup of coffee. You will not be able to pay your rent. You will not be able to pay the retainer fees required to fight a legal battle of this magnitude. Elaine leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, clearly expecting me to panic. She had seen sudden wealth destroy families before. She was waiting for me to crack under the pressure of my own blood relatives trying to financially suffocate me. Instead, I felt a slow, cold smile spread across my face. I looked at the imposing stack of threatening legal documents and felt absolutely nothing but pure, calculated amusement. Let them freeze my personal checking account, I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, calculated register. Let them execute their emergency injunction. Let them think they have me backed into a corner. In fact, I hope Bradley personally oversees the execution of the court order. I want him to look closely at the exact balance they are freezing. Elaine frowned slightly, clearly confused by my complete lack of concern. Aaliyah, an asset freeze means you have zero liquidity. They are trying to starve you out. I leaned forward, resting my own elbows on the cool marble, mimicking her posture. Let them freeze it, Elaine, I repeated, my smile widening into a confident smirk. There is exactly $412 sitting in my personal checking account. That is the only account tied to my legal name in this state. Elaine stared at me, her eyes widening slightly as the realization began to click into place. Bradley thinks I am just a stupid freelance bookkeeper. I continued enjoying the absolute brilliance of our prior planning. He thinks I routed $100 million into a standard local bank branch like an idiot. He thinks I am playing his game by his rules. He has no idea that the money never touched my personal accounts. Let him freeze my $400. Let him freeze the empty shell of a life I used to live. The $100 million is sitting safely offshore, routed directly into the Apex Horizon Trust under a corporate shell company they do not even know exists. Bradley is bringing a knife to a gunfight, and he does not even realize the war has already moved across the ocean. The sterile conference room smelled of lemon cleaning solution and stale coffee. The heavy mahogany door closed with a muted click, sealing me inside a glass-walled box designed entirely for psychological warfare. Across the wide, polished table sat Bradley. He wore a navy pinstripe suit that screamed Wall Street arrogance. He lounged in his ergonomic chair with his ankles crossed, looking incredibly smug. Next to him sat his lead counsel, a shark named Vance, who wore a watch worth more than my entire apartment building. Directly behind them, sitting in rigid upright chairs like a royal court observing an execution, were my parents. Marcus glared at me with absolute contempt, his jaw locked tight. Patricia refused to even make eye contact, choosing instead to examine her perfectly manicured fingernails with an air of bored disgust. They were actively attempting to make me feel small. They wanted me to revert to the timid younger daughter who always bowed her head to keep the peace. I sat perfectly still beside Elaine, keeping my posture straight and my expression entirely unreadable. Vance did not waste time with pleasantries. He opened a thick leather binder and immediately launched into a brutal, coordinated character assassination. Miss Aaliyah, we are here to establish the factual timeline regarding the Thanksgiving verbal agreement. Vance began, his voice sharp and nasal. But first we need to establish your state of mind and financial reality at the time the agreement was made. My clients indicate that you have a long documented history of severe financial instability. Is it true that you have worked exclusively as a freelance bookkeeper for the past 7 years, barely earning above the poverty line? I earn a respectable living managing accounts for small businesses, I replied calmly. Vance talked right over me. A living subsidized by your parents' generosity, he corrected sharply, pointing a pen directly at me. A living plagued by resentment. My clients have provided sworn statements that you have harbored deep-seated bitterness toward your sister Jasmine and her husband Bradley due to their immense financial success. You saw an opportunity to steal a family asset, a lottery ticket purchased entirely with your father Marcus's money, and you took it out of pure spite. You cashed out a family pool ticket because you were tired of being the struggling sister. Elaine sat silently beside me, letting Vance spin his ridiculous narrative. We had anticipated this exact strategy. They were trying to rattle me. They wanted to provoke an emotional outburst so the court reporter would document me as unstable. That is a complete fabrication, I stated, keeping my voice perfectly flat. There was no family pool. My father tossed a scratch-off ticket at me and told me to buy my own pie because he thought my financial status was a joke. Bradley scoffed loudly, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the polished table. He completely ignored his own lawyer's restraining hand. He simply could not stand hearing someone else control the room. "Do not play dumb, Aaliyah!" Bradley interrupted, his voice dripping with heavy, patronizing authority. "You have always lacked basic financial literacy. You have zero concept of wealth building or asset management. Everyone in this room knows it. You are terrified of money because you do not understand it. Remember 3 years ago when I offered you a ground floor opportunity to invest in my crypto startup? I practically begged you to let me manage your meager little savings account. I tried to bring you into the fold, and you completely panicked. You called my business model unstable. You refused to participate in a guaranteed return on investment because you are fundamentally incapable of understanding high-level finance. That is exactly why you stole the ticket. You panicked and acted on raw, stupid emotion because you knew you could not manage it on your own. I stared directly into Bradley's arrogant blue eyes, refusing to blink. The sheer audacity of the man was breathtaking. I refuse to invest in your crypto startup because I actually know how to read a balance sheet, Bradley. I fired back, my voice cutting through the sterile air like a knife. I refused to hand over my savings because I saw that you were over-leveraging imaginary assets and burning through capital on luxury office spaces instead of development. And exactly 9 months after you mocked me for walking away, your entire startup filed for bankruptcy and wiped out your primary investors. So please do not lecture me about financial literacy. I know exactly how you operate. Bradley's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second, a flash of genuine rage crossing his features before he forced his mask back into place. Marcus shifted uncomfortably behind him, clearly displeased that I had brought up his golden son-in-law's massive public failure. Patricia finally looked up, glaring at me for daring to insult her perfect daughter's perfect husband. Vance quickly intervened, slamming his hand flat against the table to redirect the focus back to his legal threats. "This is completely irrelevant," Vance barked, leaning forward aggressively. "The facts of the current matter are indisputable. Marcus purchased the winning ticket. It was distributed at a family gathering. A verbal contract to share the proceeds was established and broken by your client. We have secured an emergency injunction freezing all of your domestic accounts, Aaliyah. You have absolutely zero access to capital. You cannot pay rent. You cannot buy groceries. Your back is against the wall." Vance pulled a freshly printed document from his binder and slid it toward the center of the table. "We are offering a one-time resolution." Vance continued, his tone shifting from aggressive to demanding. "Transfer the $100 million back into the primary family trust immediately. Once the funds are secured under Marcus and Bradley's management, we will lift the freeze on your personal accounts and arrange for your monthly stipend as previously discussed. If you refuse, we will litigate this until you are entirely bankrupt. Transfer the funds right now." The room fell dead silent. Bradley crossed his arms, looking incredibly satisfied with his lawyer's aggressive ultimatum. Marcus and Patricia leaned forward, eagerly waiting for me to break. They expected me to reach for a pen and sign away my life out of pure financial terror. They truly believed they had trapped me. Elaine did not flinch. She slowly opened her slim black portfolio. She did not pull out a thick stack of counter-arguments or dramatic affidavits. She pulled out a single crisp piece of paper. She placed her hand flat over it and looked directly at Vance, matching his aggressive stare with absolute calm. "My client cannot transfer funds she does not possess," Elaine stated, her voice ringing with absolute cold authority. She slid the single piece of paper across the smooth mahogany table until it stopped exactly in front of Bradley. "The $100 million is held exclusively by the Apex Horizon Trust." Elaine continued, watching the color begin to drain from Bradley's face as he read the bold print on the document. "My client is merely a blind beneficiary of that entity. She has no legal authority to initiate a wire transfer of that magnitude, and you have absolutely zero jurisdiction to demand it." Vance stared at the single sheet of crisp white paper sitting on the polished mahogany table. His aggressive posture deflated instantly. He picked up the document, handling it delicately, as if the paper itself were radioactive. His eyes darted rapidly across the page, reading the airtight legal structuring of the Apex Horizon Trust. The color completely drained from his face. He looked at Bradley, and then back at Elaine. He knew he was beaten. An irrevocable blind trust, housed in a jurisdiction completely outside their immediate reach, meant his emergency injunction was entirely useless. He could freeze my $400, but the $100 million was legally untouchable. Marcus realized exactly what the heavy silence meant. The polished, affluent commercial real estate titan facade crumbled into dust right before my eyes. He stood up so fast his heavy wooden chair crashed backward onto the expensive carpet. He slammed his closed fist onto the conference table with enough force to make the crystal water pitchers rattle. "You ungrateful little brat!" Marcus roared, his face a mask of pure desperation and rage. "I bought that ticket. I paid for it with my own money. It is mine. You have absolutely no right to lock it away from your own father." I did not flinch. I turned my attention away from my father's red face and looked at the court reporter sitting quietly in the corner of the room. Her fingers hovered nervously over her stenography machine. "Excuse me," I said, my voice perfectly calm and polite, cutting through the echo of my father's shouting. "Could you please read back my father's sworn testimony from 20 minutes ago? Specifically the section where Mr. Vance asked him to describe the exact exchange at the Thanksgiving dinner table." The reporter nodded and scrolled back through her digital transcript. She cleared her throat and read aloud in a flat, monotone voice. Quote, "I tossed the scratch-off ticket across the table to Aaliyah. It was a joke gift, a gag. I told her since she was always complaining about her freelance income, she could use it to buy her own dessert." End quote. I looked back at Marcus. "A joke gift," I repeated, letting the words hang in the sterile air of the conference room. "You stated under penalty of perjury that it was a gift. You surrendered ownership the moment it left your hand. You cannot legally reclaim a gift just because you suddenly realize its actual value." Bradley slammed his hands onto the table, leaning forward to shield his father-in-law. He was desperate to regain control of the room and salvage his own financial future. "This is a technicality," he snapped, his voice sharp and panicked. "You are hiding behind legal loopholes because you know you cannot manage this portfolio. You are a bookkeeper, Aaliyah. You do not understand high-level asset management. You are going to trigger a massive federal audit. You are going to violate tax codes you do not even know exist. You need my firm to manage this capital before you end up in federal prison." I looked at Bradley with a mixture of pity and absolute disdain. I folded my hands neatly on the table. "Let us talk about federal compliance, Bradley," I said, my voice steady and commanding. "Since we are on the record, let us discuss your specific expertise in high-level asset management. When you launched your crypto startup last year, you aggressively solicited investments from unaccredited family members and friends." Bradley swallowed hard. His arrogant posture faltered. "You promised guaranteed returns," I continued, locking my eyes onto his. "You completely bypassed Securities and Exchange Commission Regulation D. You failed to file a Form D notice of exempt offering of securities. You commingled investor funds with your personal operating accounts in direct violation of basic fiduciary duties. That is not just poor management, Bradley. That is a textbook violation of the Securities Act of 1933. The only reason you are not currently facing federal indictment is because your investors were your country club friends and they chose to write off the losses rather than face a public scandal." Vance raised his hand immediately. "Objection. This line of questioning is completely irrelevant to the current proceeding. It goes directly to character and financial competency," Elaine interjected smoothly without raising her voice. "Mr. Vance, your client opened the door by questioning my client's financial literacy on the record. We are simply establishing that your client lacks the regulatory knowledge to act as a fiduciary for any trust, let alone a 9-figure portfolio." Bradley opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He stuttered, his face flushing a deep crimson. He looked at Vance for help, but his expensive lawyer was busy packing his documents back into his leather binder. Vance knew a losing battle when he saw one. He was not going to risk his own legal reputation defending a man who had just been exposed as a regulatory liability on a sworn transcript. Patricia sat frozen beside her husband, staring at Bradley in absolute horror, as the reality of his failed business was laid bare on the legal record. The deposition crumbled into a bitter, silent stalemate. Vance officially withdrew his demand for an immediate transfer of funds. He requested a recess to confer with his clients and evaluate their legal position. Elaine agreed with a polite nod, snapping her portfolio shut. We had completely neutralized their aggressive opening maneuver. They had walked into the room expecting a quick surrender, and they were leaving with nothing but a worthless emergency injunction and a transcript full of their own damning admissions. I walked out of the conference room and headed down the long glass-walled corridor toward the elevators. I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The oppressive weight of my family's expectations and demands had finally been lifted. I pressed the call button and watched the digital numbers count down. The elevator doors chimed and slid open. Before I could step inside, a hand grabbed my shoulder and spun me around. Jasmine stood there, her designer purse clutched tightly against her side. Her eyes were red-rimmed and her face was contorted with a mixture of grief and pure malice. Marcus and Patricia stood a few paces behind her, watching the exchange with cold, detached fury. Bradley was nowhere to be seen, likely hiding in the conference room with Vance. Jasmine stepped directly into my personal space, forcing me to back up against the polished steel doors of the elevator. She jabbed a manicured finger into my collarbone. "You think you are so smart?" Jasmine hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You think you can just walk away with our money and pretend we do not exist? You think this little stunt with your fancy lawyer makes you untouchable? Watch your back, Aaliyah." I brushed her hand away from my shoulder. "The money was never yours, Jasmine," I said calmly. "It is time for you to figure out how to pay for your own lifestyle." Jasmine let out a sharp, breathless laugh that sounded entirely unhinged. She leaned in so close I could feel her hot breath against my cheek. "I am not letting this go," she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "I am going to make sure everyone in this city knows exactly who you are. I am going to call every reporter and every news station. I am going to make sure everyone knows what a thief you are." She stepped back, her eyes blazing with a terrifying promise. The elevator doors began to slide shut between us, leaving me alone as I descended toward the street. The heavy steel doors sealed shut with a final resounding thud. I rode the elevator down to the lobby in total silence, my pulse perfectly steady. Jasmine was not making an idle threat. She operated in the currency of public perception, and she had spent the last decade building a digital empire based on the fabricated perfection of her life. She possessed 500,000 followers who hung on her every perfectly curated word. I knew the retaliation would be swift. I simply underestimated how low she was willing to go. By the time I reached my apartment and poured a glass of water, my phone was already vibrating off the kitchen counter. Notifications flooded the screen in a rapid, unbroken stream. Jasmine had gone live. I opened the social media application, and there was my sister's face occupying the entire screen. She had clearly prepared for this performance. Her usually flawless hair was artfully tousled. She wore no makeup except for a subtle redness around her eyes to suggest hours of weeping. She sat on the plush white sofa of her living room, clutching a tissue with trembling hands. "It breaks my heart to share this with you all," Jasmine said, her voice cracking with expertly measured vulnerability. "But my family is going through an unimaginable nightmare. Many of you know my sister Aaliyah. We have tried for years to help her. We have paid for therapy. We have supported her through her mental instability, but some people simply cannot be saved. Yesterday, she crossed a line we can never forgive. She stole our parents' entire retirement fund. She exploited their trust and took everything they had saved for their final years. Please keep my parents in your prayers. They are completely devastated." I leaned against the marble countertop, watching the video loop a second time. The comments beneath the post were a terrifying avalanche of misplaced sympathy and vitriol. Thousands of strangers were offering prayers for Marcus and Patricia, while simultaneously calling for my immediate arrest. Jasmine had brilliantly reframed a lottery ticket into a sacred retirement fund. She had weaponized her audience, converting 500,000 bored-scrolling strangers into a mobilized digital army. The real-world consequences manifested within the hour. My phone buzzed with a text message from Eleanor, the head of the hospitality committee at Grace Fellowship, the highly affluent church my parents attended and practically funded. The message was brief and dripping with passive-aggressive righteousness. "We are praying for your soul, Aaliyah. Pastor Thomas is devastated by your actions. Please know you are temporarily suspended from the congregation until you return what you took from your poor parents." I tossed the phone onto the counter and let out a sharp laugh. I did not feel a shred of panic. I only felt a deep clinical fascination at Jasmine's absolute predictability. I watched her wipe a single tear from the corner of her right eye on the screen. The mechanics of her performance were identical to the routine she perfected when we were teenagers. I remembered the exact origin of that specific tearful expression. We were 16, and Jasmine had secretly borrowed Patricia's diamond tennis bracelet to wear to a country club party. She lost it somewhere near the golf course. When Patricia discovered the empty jewelry box, Jasmine did not confess. She sat on this exact same style of white sofa, squeezed her eyes shut until they turned red, and wiped a single tear from her right eye. She swore to our parents that she had seen me digging through Patricia's drawers the day before. She claimed I was acting erratic and jealous. Marcus and Patricia did not even question her narrative. They grounded me for 6 months, searched my room like criminals, and treated me like a resident thief, while Jasmine sat in the corner dabbing her eyes with a tissue. She used those exact same fake tears to secure her own safety at my expense. Now she was simply broadcasting that same childhood manipulation to a global audience. My phone rang, shattering the quiet of my kitchen. The caller ID displayed the name of my business partner, Maya. We ran a specialized financial consulting firm, managing the books for high-end boutique agencies across the city. It was a legitimate, highly respected business that I had built from the ground up entirely without my father's money. I answered the call, and Maya's voice came through sharp and breathless. "Aaliyah, what on earth is happening?" Maya demanded. "Have you looked at our public business page in the last 20 minutes?" "I have not," I replied, pulling my laptop toward me and waking up the screen. "What am I looking at?" "We are being review bombed," Maya said, the panic clear in her tone. "We have received over 400 one-star reviews since 3 o'clock. They are flooding our page. People are leaving comments calling you an embezzler, a fraud, and a thief. They are claiming you steal from your own family and warning our clients to drop us. Aaliyah, this is going to trigger an automatic suspension of our business profile. They are coordinating an attack on our primary source of income." Jasmine was executing a scorched earth strategy. She knew she could not touch the trust fund, so she was directing her followers to annihilate my professional reputation and starve me out. She wanted me isolated, broke, and begging for mercy. I opened my browser and watched the fraudulent reviews pour in real time. Each one was a vicious echo of Jasmine's tearful video. They thought public shame would break me. They thought destroying my consulting firm would force me back to the negotiation table. "Do not panic, Maya," I said, my voice dropping into a smooth, calculated register. "Let them leave their reviews. Do not respond to a single one." "Aaliyah, this is our livelihood," Maya argued. "It is a distraction," I corrected, closing the browser tab completely. "My sister thinks she can win a financial war by weaponizing her followers. She is severely underestimating the battlefield." I minimized my email and opened a highly secured encrypted application on my desktop. The dark interface of my forensic accounting software flared to life on the monitor. I bypassed the standard login and utilized my two-factor authentication keys. I had spent the last 5 years quietly mapping out the financial architecture of my father's failing real estate empire and Bradley's disastrous shell companies. I knew exactly where the bodies were buried. "Let her cry on camera," I murmured, watching the complex data nodes connect across my screen, forming a web of offshore accounts and unreported private loans. "If they want to play dirty in public, let us see what they are hiding in private." The glow of the dual monitors cast a pale blue light across my darkened office. While Jasmine was busy whipping her digital audience into a manufactured frenzy, I was quietly mapping the financial arteries of my family's supposed empire. I did not need to cry on camera to inflict damage. I only needed data. My forensic accounting software was already running initial automated sweeps, but I required deeper access. With $100 million sitting safely in the Apex Horizon Trust, I finally possessed the limitless capital required to bypass standard commercial firewalls. I opened a secure encrypted messaging application and contacted a specialized data broker based in Geneva. I wired a $50,000 retainer from one of my newly established offshore corporate accounts. My instructions were highly specific. I needed unrestricted access to proprietary corporate registries, international shell company filings, and unredacted property deeds associated with Marcus and Bradley. The information began flooding my servers within the hour. It was a chaotic tangle of numbers, aliases, and routing codes that would have looked like absolute gibberish to anyone else. To me, it was a perfectly clear roadmap. I started with my father. Marcus had always portrayed himself as a titan of commercial real estate. He loved to stand at the head of the Thanksgiving table carving the turkey while lecturing me about the absolute superiority of brick and mortar assets over my modest bookkeeping wages. He demanded respect because he projected wealth. I pulled the public records on his three largest suburban development projects. The facade shattered instantly. Marcus did not own those properties. He was completely drowning in toxic mezzanine debt. When the traditional banks had rightfully cut off his credit lines years ago, due to poor management, he had turned to predatory hard money lenders. I traced the routing numbers on his recent loan modifications. He was paying exorbitant 20% interest rates just to keep the construction sites from being padlocked. The properties were cross-collateralized, meaning if one development defaulted, the lenders could seize the entire portfolio. His firm was nothing more than a hollow house of cards, held together by sheer arrogance and balloon payments he could never possibly meet. He was not a real estate titan. He was a desperate man standing on a trapdoor. I shifted my focus to Bradley, my perfect golden brother-in-law who had just spent 2 hours in a deposition calling me financially illiterate. Bradley had proudly declared bankruptcy on his crypto startup, claiming market volatility had wiped out his investors. I ran his social security number and corporate tax identification codes through the international registries provided by my Geneva broker. The algorithm began flagging offshore accounts faster than I could read them. Bradley had not simply lost his investors' money in a volatile market. He had funneled it through a labyrinth of shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands and the Seychelles. I downloaded the transaction ledgers and began tracing the flow of capital. He had taken the startup capital and leveraged it into massive high-risk margin debt on unregulated overseas exchanges. When the crypto market dipped, he received margin calls he could not cover. The money was not lost. It was forcibly liquidated by foreign brokers to cover his reckless gambling. Bradley was currently carrying a negative balance of nearly $12 million in offshore liabilities. He was bleeding cash at an astonishing rate and actively hiding the hemorrhage from his domestic partners and his wife. I leaned back in my chair, taking a slow, deep breath. The picture was becoming terrifyingly clear. My family was not just wealthy and greedy. They were entirely insolvent. They were actively drowning and trying to use my face as a stepping stone to save themselves. But the numbers still did not completely align. The timeline of Marcus's predatory loans and Bradley's margin calls indicated they should have both defaulted at least 6 months ago. Someone had injected a massive amount of hidden liquidity into their accounts right before Thanksgiving to delay the inevitable collapse. I opened the municipal property registry and typed in the address of my parents' sprawling estate. It was the crown jewel of the family, the massive colonial mansion where I had endured decades of emotional abuse. Marcus had always boasted that the estate was completely paid off, a pristine, unencumbered asset, proving his financial dominance. The digital deed materialized on my screen. I scanned the title history and stopped dead. My blood ran completely cold. Exactly 4 months ago, a massive second mortgage had been registered against the primary estate. The loan was for $8 million, originating from a high-risk private equity firm known for aggressive foreclosure tactics. I pulled the digital copy of the loan origination documents. Marcus's sprawling, arrogant signature was stamped clearly on the bottom line, right next to Patricia's neat cursive. They had signed away the family home. Except something was fundamentally wrong with the digital footprint of the document. I ran the PDF through a metadata extractor. The file had been signed electronically using a secure digital signature platform. I pulled the IP address and routing details associated with the exact moment the document was executed. The IP address did not belong to Marcus's office. It did not belong to the family estate. The geolocation coordinates traced directly back to a luxury high-rise condominium downtown. It traced exactly to Bradley and Jasmine's penthouse. I stared at the screen as the horrifying reality of their desperation finally snapped into perfect focus. Marcus had not signed that second mortgage. Patricia had not signed it. Bradley had secretly taken out an $8 million loan against his father-in-law's fully paid-off mansion. Bradley had forged Marcus's digital signature to secure the capital needed to cover his catastrophic offshore crypto losses. If Marcus defaulted on his predatory commercial loans, the banks would initiate a full financial audit. If the banks initiated an audit, they would immediately discover the fraudulent second mortgage. Bradley would face federal indictment for wire fraud and identity theft. Marcus would lose everything he had ever built. Patricia would be thrown out onto the street. They did not just want my $100 million to buy new sports cars or country club memberships. They were entirely bankrupt. They were days away from total annihilation. My lottery ticket was literally their only way to avoid federal prison. I closed the forensic accounting software and immediately opened my encrypted communication channel. I did not want to simply expose Bradley and Marcus to the authorities. Exposing them would hand their fate over to federal prosecutors and bank auditors. That was too easy. That was too clean. I wanted their fate resting entirely in my own hands. I wanted to watch them realize exactly who held the leash. I initiated a secure video call with Elias Thorne. Elias was a high-level private equity broker based in Zurich who specialized in acquiring highly distressed, toxic debt portfolios. He was a financial predator who operated exclusively in the shadows, moving capital across borders with terrifying efficiency. His face appeared on my monitor, sharp and intensely focused. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I transmitted the specific portfolio identification numbers I had just extracted from the global registry. I pointed him directly to Marcus's commercial real estate mezzanine loans and the fraudulent $8 million second mortgage Bradley had secretly attached to my parents' primary estate. I want to initiate a hostile anonymous buyout of this entire debt package, I instructed, keeping my voice perfectly flat. I want the paper, Elias. I want my holding company to become their sole creditor by the close of business today. Elias scanned the digital files, his eyes darting across the screen. He let out a low whistle of genuine surprise. "This paper is radioactive, Aaliyah," he said, leaning forward. "The commercial loans are severely overleveraged and in technical default. The residential mortgage carries massive high-risk margin terms. The original lenders are likely desperate to offload this liability before the entire structure collapses. I can acquire it, but you are buying absolute garbage. The secondary market value is pennies on the dollar." "I am not buying it for a financial return," I replied, watching the data streams continue to process on my secondary monitor. "I am buying it for leverage. Offer them a premium. Pay 20 cents on the dollar. Make the offer so aggressively lucrative that the original lenders will sign the transfer documents within the hour without asking a single question. Consolidate the entire debt structure under my primary anonymous shell corporation." Elias nodded, understanding immediately that this was a tactical acquisition rather than a traditional investment. He began drafting the transfer protocols and routing them through my secure portal. I opened the digital authorization file. The total acquisition cost to purchase my family's complete financial ruin was $24 million. It was a staggering sum of money, but it represented less than a quarter of the trust fund's liquidity. As my cursor hovered over the authorization's signature line, I stared at the scanned image of Bradley's forged signature on the underlying mortgage deed. My mind flashed back to the country club charity gala 3 years ago. The memory was sharp and bitter. We were standing near a towering ice sculpture when Patricia grabbed my arm and pulled me aside. She pointed her crystal champagne flute toward the center of the ballroom, where Bradley was holding court with a group of wealthy, older investors. He was laughing loudly, flashing his perfect teeth, and playing the role of the visionary entrepreneur. Patricia looked at me with deep, profound disappointment. "Bradley is the son we always wanted." Patricia had murmured, her voice carrying absolute, unwavering conviction. "He is a true provider, Aaliyah. He understands how to build a legacy. He understands power. Why can you not find a man like that? You are always so focused on your little spreadsheets and your modest little clients. You lack vision. You need someone who actually understands how the real world works. I pressed enter. My digital signature locked the transfer protocol. $24 million flowed instantly out of the Apex Horizon Trust, moving silently through a nested series of corporate entities before landing directly into Elias Thorne's Swiss escrow account. Within 45 minutes, Elias sent a secure confirmation receipt. The original predatory lenders had eagerly accepted the premium offer and offloaded the toxic debt. My anonymous holding company was now the sole owner of Marcus's commercial real estate loans. I was now the sole owner of the mortgage on the family mansion. I owned the very roof over Patricia's head. I typed a final directive to Elias. Immediately invoke the acceleration clause buried in the original loan covenants. The acceleration clause was a standard mechanism in high-risk lending. It allowed the creditor to demand immediate payment in full if the underlying asset valuation dropped or if any fraudulent activity was suspected in the loan origination. Bradley's forgery provided all the legal justification required. I sat back in the silent glow of my office monitors. The trap was set. The steel jaws had snapped shut. I did not have to lift a finger to initiate the next phase of the war. I simply had to wait for the shockwave to hit them. Jasmine was still busy posting her tearful videos playing the victim for her followers, completely oblivious to the fact that her perfect husband had just bankrupted her parents. She was fighting a public relations battle while I was silently dismantling the very ground they walked on. The sun was just beginning to set, painting my office in long, dark shadows, when my personal cell phone illuminated. The caller ID displayed my mother's private number. I did not answer. I sat perfectly still and let it ring. I watched the screen flash continuously until it finally flipped to voicemail. A minute later, the notification icon popped up on my screen. I tapped the icon and brought the phone to my ear. Patricia's voice was not composed. It was not carrying its usual arrogant country club drawl. She sounded absolutely hysterical. Her breath hitched in wild, panicked gasps, and I could hear Marcus shouting incoherently in the background. "Aaliyah, please pick up the phone!" Patricia begged, her voice trembling with raw, unfiltered terror. "You have to pick up the phone right now. The bank just called your father. Our loans were sold. The entire commercial portfolio and the house. They sold the paper to some ruthless private equity firm, and they are invoking an acceleration clause. They are demanding immediate payment in full by tomorrow morning. Aaliyah, we do not have it. The commercial accounts are frozen and the house is leveraged. We are going to lose the estate. We are going to lose everything. Please, Aaliyah. I know we have had our differences, but we are blood. If you have any heart at all, you will wire us that lottery money today. You have to save the family home. Please call me back." I listened to the voicemail click off, and the room fell back into a heavy, satisfying silence. I did not call her back. I did not even save the message. I simply pressed delete and placed my phone face down on the marble counter. The frantic desperation in my mother's voice was a sound I had waited my entire life to hear. But now that it had finally arrived, I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no guilt, no remorse. I only felt the cold, clinical precision of a surgeon preparing to excise a toxic tumor. The next morning, I arrived at my consulting firm 45 minutes before our standard opening hours. The digital smear campaign Jasmine had launched the previous afternoon was still raging online, but the physical world required a different kind of preparation. With the Apex Horizon Trust fully operational and liquid, I had immediately retained a top-tier private security firm. Two men in immaculate dark suits stood discreetly by the glass doors of my building's lobby. They were former federal agents. They were highly trained. They were extremely expensive. They were worth every single penny. Upstairs, Maya was already at her desk, looking pale and exhausted from monitoring the ongoing review bomb on our public business profile. I walked past her desk and handed her a fresh cup of artisan coffee. "I told you to ignore the digital noise, Maya," I said, keeping my voice light and unbothered. "The reviews are meaningless. The internet mob is meaningless. We are pivoting our entire client base anyway." I walked into my private office and woke up my monitors. I needed to organize the financial carnage into highly structured digital vaults. The raw data Elias Thorne had acquired needed to be weaponized into clean, undeniable legal exhibits. I exported the offshore account ledgers. I exported the fraudulent mortgage deeds. I exported the cross-collateralized loan agreements. I meticulously saved the compiled evidence into 4 encrypted documents on my secure server. I labeled them precisely to maintain the absolute chain of custody. I encrypted the entire folder and sent it directly to my legal team. The digital paper trail was complete. The digital paper trail was indestructible. I was just closing my email client when a sharp commotion erupted down in the lobby. My office was on the second floor with large soundproof glass windows overlooking the street, but I could still hear the shrill, unmistakable pitch of my sister's voice echoing up the central marble stairwell. Jasmine had escalated her attack. She was not content with hiding behind her screen. She was not content with her pristine living room tears. She needed a real-world confrontation. She needed to capture my face. She needed to feed her audience live entertainment. I stepped out of my office and walked to the edge of the glass mezzanine, looking down into the lobby. Jasmine was charging through the revolving doors, holding her smartphone high in the air attached to a stabilizing gimbal. She was live streaming to her 500,000 followers, documenting her righteous crusade against her evil, greedy sister. She looked entirely unhinged. Her designer trench coat was hastily thrown over a tracksuit, and her face was a mask of manufactured fury. She pointed the camera lens directly at the reception desk, demanding to know exactly what floor I was on. "Here is the office of the woman who stole our parents' future," Jasmine shouted into her phone, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I am going up there right now, and I am not leaving until she looks you all in the eye and admits what she did to our family." She did not make it past the security desk. My 2 private security contractors moved with terrifying synchronized efficiency. They did not shout, they did not threaten. They simply stepped into Jasmine's path, creating an impenetrable physical wall. When Jasmine tried to sidestep them, the taller agent seamlessly shifted, blocking her trajectory entirely. "Excuse me," Jasmine shrieked, shoving her phone directly into the agent's face. "You cannot touch me. I am live right now to hundreds of thousands of people. You are assaulting me. Let me through to see my sister." "Ma'am, you are trespassing on private commercial property," the agent said, his voice a flat, monotone rumble. "You need to turn off the recording device and exit the building immediately." Jasmine tried to push past him, throwing her weight against his shoulder. It was a massive mistake. In one fluid motion, the second agent stepped forward, seized the gimbal, and smoothly confiscated the phone right out of her hands. The live stream was abruptly terminated as the agent powered down the device and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Jasmine stood frozen in absolute shock. The sudden deprivation of her audience stripped away her entire source of power. She was no longer a digital crusader. She was no longer a victim. She was just an angry woman trespassing in a corporate lobby. "Give that back to me!" Jasmine screamed, her voice cracking with genuine panic. "You are thieves just like her." I walked slowly down the sweeping glass staircase. The rhythmic click of my heels drew her attention upward. Her eyes locked onto mine, and her expression contorted into pure, unfiltered hatred. "You are nothing!" Jasmine screamed, pointing a manicured finger at me as I reached the bottom step. "You hear me, Aaliyah? You have always been nothing. You have always been jealous of me, of Bradley, of the life we built. You think hiring some rented muscle makes you important. You are a glorified bookkeeper. You are pathetic, and I am going to ruin you." I did not stop walking. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I moved past my security detail, stopping inches away from my sister. The lobby was dead silent. I leaned in close, invading her personal space, just as she had done to me in the elevator after the deposition. "How is Bradley's Cayman Island account doing, Jasmine?" I whispered, my voice so low and sharp that only she could hear the words. Jasmine's mouth snapped shut. The furious energy drained out of her body in an instant. "Tell him to check his offshore balances." I continued, keeping my eyes locked dead onto hers. "Tell him a margin call is coming. And tell him I have the paperwork for the $8 million mortgage he forged in Dad's name." I watched the color completely vanish from Jasmine's face. Her tanned complexion turned a sickly, translucent gray. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The arrogant, self-righteous influencer vanished, replaced by a terrified woman staring directly into the abyss of federal prison. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She realized in that fraction of a second that I was not fighting a public relations battle. I was holding the detonator to her entire existence. My security agent pulled her phone from his pocket and dropped it onto the marble floor at her feet. The screen cracked with a sharp snap. Jasmine did not even try to argue. She did not demand an apology. She did not pick up the phone. She looked at the cracked screen, looked back at me with wide, terrified eyes, and turned around. She stumbled blindly through the revolving doors and broke into a full frantic sprint across the pavement, running back to her car in absolute sheer panic. I watched my sister's car screech out of the parking lot and merge recklessly into downtown traffic. The digital war was over, and the physical reality of their absolute ruin was finally setting in. Through a network of highly placed legal informants, Elaine kept me updated on the exact temperature inside my parents' estate. The walls of their fortress were crumbling, and the panic behind their heavy mahogany doors was absolute. Marcus and Bradley had summoned Vance for an emergency strategy session in my father's study. The atmosphere was no longer arrogant or commanding. It was entirely desperate. Vance, a man who billed thousands of dollars an hour, had delivered the lethal blow to their remaining hopes. He informed them that pursuing a lawsuit over the lottery ticket was a catastrophic dead end. The Apex Horizon Trust was an impenetrable offshore fortress. To even attempt to crack it would require a minimum of 5 years of grueling international litigation and upwards of $3 million in upfront legal fees. They did not have $3 million. Thanks to my hostile buyout, they did not even have the liquidity to pay their landscaping staff. Bradley was pacing the floor, sweating through his custom-tailored shirt, terrified of the federal indictment looming over his forged mortgage documents. He knew that if the private equity firm, which was secretly me, forced an audit, he would be wearing handcuffs before the end of the month. Marcus was staring at the bottom of a Scotch glass, realizing his entire commercial empire was hours away from public foreclosure. They needed cash immediately. They needed a massive injection of capital just to keep the authorities at bay. It was Bradley, the ultimate coward, who pitched the final desperate strategy. They could not beat me in court, so they had to trick me into a voluntary surrender. They needed to draft a predatory settlement agreement disguising a massive cash payout as a family trust restructuring. But to get me to sign it, they needed to play on the one weakness they assumed I still possessed. They thought I still craved their approval. They thought I still wanted a family. 2 days later, a private courier arrived at the reception desk of my consulting firm. He requested my signature and handed me a thick, heavy cream-colored envelope. I recognized the gold-embossed crest immediately. It was the insignia of the Oakwood Country Club. I carried the envelope into my private office and sliced it open with a silver letter opener. Inside was heavy cardstock featuring Patricia's elegant, sweeping calligraphy. It was titled, "An Invitation to Reconcile." She wrote that the family had suffered enough, that money was destroying our bond, and that they wanted to make amends. She requested my presence for a private dinner in the executive dining room at Oakwood to heal the rift and move forward as a united family. I ran my thumb over the raised gold lettering of the club's crest, feeling a cold, familiar wave of memory wash over me. The Oakwood Country Club was not just a venue. It was Patricia's personal kingdom. She reigned supreme over the hospitality committee and the board of directors, dictating social hierarchies with ruthless precision. It was also her favorite weapon of exclusion. When I was 18, Patricia hosted a massive, lavish graduation dinner for Jasmine in that exact same executive dining room. I had spent hours ironing my only formal dress, wanting nothing more than to celebrate with my sister. When I walked downstairs and asked what time the driver was arriving, Patricia had stopped adjusting her diamond earrings and looked me up and down with utter disdain. She pulled a crisp $20 bill from her purse and pressed it into my hand. Oakwood has a very strict aesthetic, Aaliyah, she had said, her voice dripping with pity. You simply do not fit the image they require. You would feel entirely out of place among our friends. Order yourself a pizza. We will see you tomorrow. She had left me standing in the foyer holding a crumpled $20 bill while the family celebrated without me. Now, 15 years later, she was using that same elite fortress as a honey trap. She believed the allure of finally being invited into her exclusive world would blind me to the legal snare they were setting. Elaine sat across from my desk reviewing a digital copy of the settlement draft her associates had managed to intercept from Vance's office. She dropped her tablet onto the glass surface and let out a sharp breath of disgust. It is a complete ambush, Elaine said, her tone laced with professional warning. They are going to sit you down in a controlled environment surrounded by their peers and their staff. Patricia will play the weeping mother and Marcus will offer a false apology. Then they will slide this document across the table. It is legally framed as a reconciliation fund, but it irrevocably transfers $40 million from your trust directly into Marcus's holding accounts. If you sign it, you surrender half your wealth and absolve them of all financial crimes. Elaine leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. You cannot step foot in that club. Patricia controls the environment. They will isolate you emotionally, manipulate you, and use the public setting to pressure you into signing. You have absolutely nothing to gain by attending this dinner. Let me send a formal rejection and we can proceed with the foreclosures. I listened to Elaine's advice, measuring the weight of her words. She was a brilliant attorney, but she was looking at this as a purely legal transaction. She did not understand the psychological debt that needed to be settled. I did not just want to take their money. I wanted to dismantle their arrogance in the exact room where they had always felt most untouchable. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out two thick leather-bound portfolios. They contained the fully executed, unredacted debt ownership transfers. They held the commercial loans, the margin debt, and the forged residential mortgage. They were the physical embodiment of my family's total annihilation. I placed the heavy portfolios onto the glass desk. They landed with a solid, definitive thud. I appreciate your caution, Elaine, I said, picking up the gold-embossed invitation and sliding it into my purse. But I am not going to Oakwood to negotiate. I am not going to sign a settlement, and I am certainly not going to seek their approval. I looked at my lawyer, my pulse perfectly calm, my vision absolutely clear. I have to go, Elaine, I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, dangerous whisper. It is time to collect. The drive to the Oakwood Country Club took exactly 42 minutes. I spent every single one of those minutes staring out the tinted windows of the Maybach, watching the city lights blur into streaks of cold neon. I did not feel anxious. I did not feel the familiar flutter of panic that used to seize my chest whenever I was summoned by my parents. The panic was gone. The fear was gone. The need for their validation was completely and permanently gone. I was operating on a level of absolute chilling clarity. The vehicle turned off the main highway and glided onto the private winding road leading to the club. Towering ancient oak trees lined the immaculate asphalt, forming a dark canopy overhead. Usually I would have driven my unassuming mid-sized sedan. Usually I would have parked near the service entrance at the far edge of the lot, hoping to avoid the judging eyes of the valet staff before sneaking through the side doors. Not tonight. Tonight was different. Tonight, every detail was a weapon. My driver steered the massive, sleek black Maybach directly past the visitor lot and pulled up to the center of the grand portico. The tires crunched softly against the pristine white gravel. The vehicle came to a smooth, perfect halt right under the glowing crystal chandelier of the main entrance. The head valet, a man who had openly sneered at my scuffed shoes and outdated coat 5 years ago, practically tripped over his own feet, rushing down the marble steps to open my door. I stepped out into the cool evening air. I was not wearing the sensible, invisible clothing my family expected. I was not wearing the apologetic posture of the forgotten daughter. I wore a custom-tailored charcoal wool suit, imported directly from Milan. The cut was razor-sharp. The fabric moved like liquid armor. I paired it with a dark silk blouse and a vintage Cartier watch that caught the ambient light. It was not loud, it was not flashy. It was the absolute epitome of quiet, lethal wealth. It was the kind of wealth that did not need to scream for attention because it already owned the building. The heavy brass-studded oak doors were pulled open for me by two uniformed attendants. I crossed the threshold and walked into the grand foyer. The air inside Oakwood smelled exactly as it always had, a thick, suffocating blend of aged leather, expensive bourbon, and old money. Conversations in the adjacent lounge began to slow down. Then they paused entirely. Members of the club wealthy elites, who had previously looked right through me, as if I were a piece of the furniture, now stopped their drinks halfway to their mouths. I felt the physical weight of their stares tracking my movements. The stares did not shrink me. The stares did not intimidate me. The stares amplified my presence. I commanded the room without speaking a single word. Every step I took was a calculation. Every step I took was a reclamation. Every step I took was a countdown to their ruin. As I moved across the plush Persian carpets, my mind pulled up a sharp, bitter memory. It was a memory I had buried deep, but tonight it surfaced with crystal clarity. 10 years ago, Patricia had forced me to attend the annual Founders Gala in this exact building. She had flatly refused to buy me a formal dress, insisting I wear one of Jasmine's old cast-offs. It was a hideous, ill-fitting pink taffeta gown that was 2 sizes too small in the shoulders and visibly stained near the hemline. I remembered pulling at the tight, rigid fabric all night, trying to hide in the shadowed corners of the ballroom while Jasmine paraded around the dance floor in brand-new imported silk. I remembered hearing Patricia telling her friends by the champagne fountain that I simply lacked the natural elegance to carry myself properly. She had called me a genetic anomaly. She had called me a lost cause. She had looked at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. I was not that girl anymore. I was not the girl they broke. I was not the girl they ignored. I was not the girl they thought they could control. The rhythmic, sharp click of my stilettos echoed against the marble floors like a metronome of impending doom. I bypassed the main dining hall entirely and headed straight down the east corridor toward the executive private dining suites. The heavy mahogany doors of the primary boardroom loomed ahead at the end of the hall. Inside those doors, the people who had bankrupted themselves trying to destroy me were waiting to offer me a trap wrapped in a peace treaty. I did not pause. I did not knock. I placed my hand flat against the polished brass handle and pushed the heavy double doors open in one smooth, forceful motion. The room was steeped in a tense, suffocating silence. Marcus sat at the head of the long, polished table. Patricia sat rigidly to his right, her hands clasped so tightly over her designer purse that her knuckles were white. Jasmine and Bradley sat on the opposite side, looking physically ill. Bradley was sweating profusely, continuously dabbing his forehead with a white linen napkin. Next to Marcus sat a man I immediately recognized. He was a high-end corporate mediator, a sleazy, highly paid operative who specialized in burying financial scandals under airtight, non-disclosure agreements. All 5 heads snapped toward the door the moment it swung open. The collective shock hit them simultaneously like a physical wave. They had expected the submissive, easily intimidated daughter to walk through those doors. They had expected the girl in the sensible flats who would bow her head and accept whatever crumbs they offered. Instead, they were staring at an executioner. Jasmine's eyes widened to the point of tearing, taking in the immaculate cut of my suit and the absolute terrifying lack of fear in my posture. Patricia's mouth opened slightly, her rehearsed maternal smile completely short-circuiting before it could even materialize. She looked at the Cartier watch on my wrist and visibly stopped breathing. Bradley swallowed hard, staring at the heavy leather portfolios clutched under my left arm. For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. The power dynamic inverted instantly, seamlessly, and permanently. Marcus forced himself to sit up straight. He tugged at his collar, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to project the aura of the commanding patriarch. But when he finally spoke, his voice lacked its usual booming authority. It carried the desperate hollow rattle of a cornered animal, realizing the trap had closed. "Sit down," Aaliyah Marcus said, gesturing weakly to the empty leather chair at the opposite end of the table. "We have drafted a compromise." I did not sit immediately. I stood at the head of the table, letting the thick, suffocating silence stretch until it became physically uncomfortable. I watched Marcus try to hold my gaze and fail. I watched Bradley shift in his seat, his custom suit suddenly looking a size too large for his shrinking frame. I looked at Jasmine, who could not even bring herself to look me in the eye. Finally, I pulled out the heavy leather chair and sat down. I placed my two leather-bound portfolios neatly on the polished mahogany surface directly in front of me. The mediator cleared his throat. He was a man who reeked of cheap cologne and expensive desperation. He had the slick, nervous energy of someone who is used to bullying the weak on behalf of the strong. He flashed a practiced artificial smile and slid a thick stack of stapled papers across the long table. The document stopped precisely an inch from my fingertips. Bradley leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. He was trying to channel the aggressive alpha male persona he used to terrorize his junior analysts, but his voice lacked conviction. His bravado was nothing more than a hollow shell. "We are willing to be reasonable, Aaliyah," Bradley said, speaking to me with the slow, exaggerated enunciation one might use with a stubborn, uncomprehending child. "We know you stumbled into this money, and we know you do not have the financial literacy to manage it long term. The family is willing to step in and save you from yourself. We are willing to drop the lawsuit over the lottery ticket entirely. We will let you walk away with $20 million free and clear. We will take the remaining $80 million to manage for the family estate under Marcus's holding company. Sign the document today and we forgive you for this entire ugly ordeal. We can put this behind us and move forward." The sheer audacity of the offer hung heavily in the quiet room. They were completely bankrupt, facing federal indictments and imminent public ruin, yet they were still trying to dictate terms. They were still trying to frame my execution as a grand favor. It was the ultimate display of their unbroken narcissism. I did not look at the paper. I did not even glance at the signature line. I reached out and picked up the crystal glass of sparkling water the club staff had poured before my arrival. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The ice clinked softly against the glass. It was the only sound in the room, amplifying the tension that was wrapping around their throats. "Forgive me," I asked, my voice perfectly, level echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "That is incredibly generous, Bradley. It is especially generous considering you and Patricia sold my grandmother's antique Steinway piano just to pay for Jasmine's luxury honeymoon in the Maldives." Jasmine flinched, visibly shrinking into her chair, as if I had physically struck her. She looked down at her hands, her large diamond rings catching the light from the crystal chandelier overhead. I remember that day with absolute clarity. I continued setting the crystal glass down on a linen coaster. I was 19 years old. I came home from my second shift at the university library to find strangers carrying the only piece of my grandmother I had left out the front door. You told me it was a necessary sacrifice for the family image. You told me Jasmine needed the perfect start to her marriage to maintain her social standing. You sold my heritage for a pair of first-class plane tickets and a beachfront villa. And now you sit here demanding my money and offering me your forgiveness. "That is ancient history, Aaliyah." Marcus growled, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "We are talking about the survival of the family legacy right now. We are offering you a way out of a brutal public court battle. If you do not sign that settlement today, Vance is going to tie you up in litigation for the next decade. He will freeze your assets. He will destroy your reputation in this city. You will have nothing." I looked at Marcus and let out a short, hollow laugh. The threat was so transparent it was almost insulting. "Vance is not going to do anything, Marcus," I replied, resting my hands on top of my closed portfolios. "Vance charges $2,000 an hour. A trust dispute of this magnitude requires a multi-jurisdictional legal team, forensic accountants, and offshore litigation specialists. It would cost you $3 million just to initiate the discovery phase. You do not have $3 million. You do not even have $300. Your commercial real estate accounts are frozen. Your mezzanine loans are in technical default. You are completely and utterly broke." The mediator shifted uncomfortably, looking rapidly between Marcus and Bradley. He had clearly not been briefed on the actual catastrophic state of their finances. He realized instantly that he was sitting on a sinking ship. "This is a highly lucrative settlement offer," Miss Wilson, the mediator, interjected, trying desperately to earn his fee and maintain control of the room. "I strongly advise you to consider the generous terms your family is extending before the legal window closes." I ignored him completely, keeping my eyes locked on my father. "You brought me here because you are terrified," I said, my voice dropping an octave, slicing through the air like a blade. "You brought me here because you know I hold the entire board, and you are begging me to let you keep a single piece. But you are too arrogant to actually beg. You had to wrap your desperation in an insult. You had to pretend you were still the ones in control of the narrative." Patricia could not take it anymore. The pristine country club facade she had maintained for decades shattered completely. She shot up from her chair, her heavy designer bracelets clattering wildly against the heavy mahogany table. Her face was contorted with genuine panic and pure, unadulterated rage. "Stop living in the past," Patricia screamed, slamming her palm flat against the polished wood. "I do not care about some old piano. I do not care about your petty grievances. Sign the paper, Aaliyah. You have to sign the paper right now. We are losing the estate. The bank sold our mortgage, and we are losing the house on Monday to some ruthless predatory equity firm. They invoked an acceleration clause. They are going to throw us out on the street like common criminals. We need that cash to save the family home." I sat back in my heavy leather chair. The moment had finally arrived. The culmination of a lifetime of exclusion, dismissal, and cruelty was sitting right in front of me, begging for salvation. I looked at Patricia's terrified face. I looked at Marcus's trembling hands. I looked at Bradley's sweating brow. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was a chilling, purely predatory smile that reached all the way to my eyes. I reached forward and flipped open the top cover of my leather-bound portfolio. I slid the thick stack of freshly minted, legally binding debt ownership transfer documents directly across the table. They stopped exactly where their fake settlement offer had landed. The silence in the executive dining room was absolute. It was a thick, suffocating vacuum that instantly consumed every ounce of oxygen in the space. The faint ambient noise of the country club outside the heavy mahogany doors, the clinking of crystal glasses, the soft murmur of wealthy patrons, the light jazz playing in the hallway seemed to vanish completely. I sat perfectly still, watching the words wash over them. I watched the reality of their situation physically crush them in real time. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the top page of the first portfolio. The sharp, rhythmic sound echoed like a gavel striking a sound block. "Apex Horizon Trust." I stated, my voice cutting through the dead air with clinical precision. "The exact same trust currently holding my lottery winnings just executed a hostile, anonymous buyout of your entire commercial real estate debt portfolio. Dad. I authorized the premium purchase 2 hours ago. The wire transfers have cleared. The digital ink is dry. Every single over-leveraged loan, every single toxic mezzanine asset, every single defaulted commercial mortgage. I own the paper. I own the building. I own your firm." Marcus's face turned the color of wet ash. The arrogant, domineering patriarch, who had spent his entire life commanding boardrooms and dictating the lives of everyone around him, was suddenly gasping for air. He gripped the edge of the heavy mahogany table so hard his knuckles turned stark white. He looked physically diminished, as if the tailored suit he wore was suddenly draped over a hollow frame. "You are lying," Marcus choked out his voice, a raspy, fragile whisper. "You do not have the clearance for this level of acquisition. You are a mid-level accountant. You review spreadsheets for regional distributors. This is a fabrication. This is an elaborate bluff. You do not have the capital to absorb those liabilities." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply reached across the table and flipped open the thick leather-bound portfolio. I spun the heavy document around so it faced him directly. I pointed to a specific highlighted row on page 47 of the master ledger. Look at the ledger, Marcus, I commanded, utilizing the exact same tone he used to use when scolding me for terrible grades I never actually received. Look at the exact transfer dates. Look at the shell companies you used to hide the insolvency of the downtown commercial plaza. Look at the date you illegally diverted employee pension funds to cover the margin call on the West Side Development Project. I leaned forward, keeping my finger pinned to the damning numbers. You thought you buried the liabilities? I continued the repetition, serving as a steady rhythmic hammer against his crumbling ego. You thought you hid the rot behind complex corporate structures. You thought you were the smartest man in the room. But you forgot what I do for a living. I am a forensic accountant. I do not just read spreadsheets. I dissect them. I dismantle them. I look for the bleeding. I found the $22 million deficit you have been hiding from your private investors for the past 3 years. You lied on the asset valuation here. You lied on the risk assessment here. You lied on the quarterly earnings report here. The sleazy corporate mediator sitting next to Marcus was frantically flipping through the supporting documents. I watched the blood rapidly drain from his face as his eyes darted across the pages. He realized in a matter of seconds the absolute legality and lethal precision of the paperwork. He pushed his leather chair back slightly, physically distancing himself from my father. He knew he was sitting next to a walking federal indictment. He silently closed his briefcase, signaling his total surrender. Patricia was making a low, keening sound in the back of her throat. Her hands were covering her mouth, smearing her expensive lipstick. She looked wildly at the plush country club walls she loved so much, realizing that her elite membership, her vaulted social status, her entire carefully curated identity was funded by a criminal house of cards that I now exclusively controlled. Jasmine was completely silent, staring down at the table with vacant, terrified eyes, her hands trembling visibly in her lap. Then Bradley moved. He could not handle the silence. He could not handle the total inversion of power happening right in front of his eyes. His fragile ego required him to speak to assert a dominance he no longer possessed. He let out a harsh, nervous scoff, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair and adjusting his expensive silk tie. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, trying to physically intimidate me across the wide expanse of mahogany. You think you are incredibly clever, do you not? Aaliyah. Bradley sneered, his upper lip curling into a condescending smirk. You think you can just march in here, wave some printed papers around, and take over a legacy corporation? You have absolutely no idea how the real world operates. You have no idea how high-level finance actually functions. He pointed a manicured finger directly at my face, his voice dripping with arrogant condescension. You cannot do this, Bradley stated. What you are describing is a hostile corporate takeover without proper regulatory disclosure. That is illegal. That is blatant market manipulation. You are a bitter little girl playing a very dangerous game with adult money. I will make one phone call, and I will have the Securities and Exchange Commission on you by tomorrow morning. They will freeze your little trust fund before you can even leave this parking lot. I did not blink. I did not react to his raised voice. I let his empty, desperate threat hang in the air, allowing him to feel the false comfort of his own bravado for exactly 3 seconds. Then I slowly turned my head. I moved my gaze away from the broken shell of my father and locked my eyes entirely onto Bradley. I stared at him with the cold, detached focus of a predator locking onto its final prey. Let us talk about the SEC, Bradley. I watched the smug satisfaction drain out of his face as I pulled a thin gray folder from the bottom of my stack. I did not open it immediately. I let him stare at the unmarked cover while his imagination ran wild. You see, Bradley, the Securities and Exchange Commission relies heavily on anonymous whistleblowers to uncover corporate malfeasance. They are particularly interested in licensed brokers who bypass compliance protocols to chase volatile digital assets. They love a paper trail that leads directly to intentional fraud. I opened the folder. Let us talk about the $4.2 million in offshore crypto debt you deliberately hid from your firm. Let us talk about the series of shell accounts you set up in the Cayman Islands, using your clients' collateral as leverage to cover your own reckless gambling. You thought routing the transactions through 3 different decentralized exchanges would mask the origin of the funds. But blockchain is a public ledger, Bradley. It is an immutable chain of digital evidence, and I traced every single token right back to your personal IP address. Bradley opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The vocal cords that had just threatened me with federal investigators were suddenly paralyzed. His face, which had been flushed with arrogant heat just moments ago, went completely pale. The sickly white pallor of a man staring down the barrel of a 20-year federal prison sentence washed over his features. His arrogant demeanor shattered instantly, scattering across the mahogany table like broken glass. He knew exactly what was in that gray folder. He knew that if I handed those IP logs and transaction receipts over to the regulatory boards, his career would be over before the sun came up. He would be barred from the financial sector, stripped of his licenses, and prosecuted to the absolute fullest extent of the law. But the SEC violation is just the appetizer, Bradley. I continued, my voice smooth and unhurried, letting the terror truly sink into his bones. I am far more interested in how you attempted to cover the massive margin call when the crypto market crashed last quarter. You needed liquid cash immediately. Your own accounts were already drained. Your firm was beginning a routine audit. You were backed into a corner with nowhere to run, so you looked at the one asset that still had untapped equity: the family mansion. I turned my gaze away from Bradley and looked directly at my father. Marcus was still clutching the edge of the table, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Dad," I said, allowing a mock tone of daughterly concern to lace my words, "tell me, did you ever authorize a second mortgage on the Oakwood estate?" Marcus blinked, his bloodshot eyes darting in confusion. "No," he croaked. "The estate has been paid off for 15 years. It is owned free and clear." I pulled a crisp white document from the gray folder and held it up by the corner. It was a notarized loan agreement from a secondary lending institution known for issuing high-interest, high-risk residential mortgages. Then you might want to ask your son-in-law why your forged signature is sitting at the bottom of a $4 million promissory note. You might want to ask him how he convinced your personal notary to stamp a document you never even saw. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes a catastrophic physical explosion. Jasmine whipped her head around to stare at her husband. The look of absolute horror on her face was a masterpiece of genuine devastation. The golden couple, the perfect suburban success story, was fracturing right in front of my eyes. "Bradley," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not forge my father's signature. Tell me you did not put a lien on the house." Bradley could not look at her. He stared down at his expensive Italian leather shoes, his chest heaving, his jaw working uselessly. "I did not," he stuttered, attempting to form a coherent sentence, attempting to spin a web of excuses. "It was a temporary bridge loan. I was going to pay it back before anyone noticed. The market just turned against me." Patricia let out a loud, dramatic gasp, clutching the string of authentic pearls resting against her collarbone. Her pristine image of upper-crust invulnerability was officially destroyed. The scandal was no longer just financial, it was criminal, and it was coming from inside her own house. "He stole from us!" Patricia shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings, breaking her carefully crafted composure. "You stole the equity out of the house I built. You forged Marcus's name. You are a criminal, Bradley. You are a disgusting, common criminal." The corporate mediator quietly zipped his briefcase shut. He stood up, pushed his chair back, and walked out of the boardroom without saying a single word. He did not even look back. He recognized a bloodbath when he saw one, and his retainer did not cover complicity in federal fraud. I watched the family tear itself apart for a few satisfying moments. I watched Marcus grab Bradley by the lapels of his suit jacket, pulling him across the mahogany table, screaming about betrayal and calling the police. I watched Jasmine bury her face in her hands, sobbing hysterically as the reality of her husband's crimes washed away her perfect life. It was a beautiful symphony of ruin, but I was not quite finished conducting. I picked up a heavy silver pen from the center of the table. The metallic clink immediately drew their attention. They froze, looking at me with wild, desperate eyes. They were waiting for me to offer a solution. They were waiting for the dutiful, discarded daughter to fix the mess. I held the pen loosely between my fingers, letting the overhead light catch the polished silver. You see, Bradley, the problem with taking out a high-interest mortgage through a shadow lender is that those lenders do not hold on to the paper. They package the debt, and they sell it to the highest bidder on the secondary market. They do not care who buys it as long as the check clears. I slid the silver pen across the smooth, polished surface of the table. It rolled with a quiet, deadly hiss, stopping perfectly parallel to his trembling hands. I bought that second mortgage too, I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, dangerous whisper that commanded the entire room. Which means I own the house you are all sitting in. You have exactly 72 hours to vacate my property. The silence that followed my ultimatum did not merely end. It shattered. It shattered completely. It shattered violently. The polished illusion of the perfect wealthy family fractured into a million jagged pieces right in front of my eyes. Jasmine lunged across the small space separating her from Bradley. She did not yell. She shrieked. It was a raw, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated panic. She raised her fists and began striking him. She hit his chest. She hit his shoulders. She hit his face. She hit him again and again and again. You fool, she screamed, her voice cracking under the weight of her sudden poverty. You stupid, arrogant fool. You lost my house, you lost my money, you lost my life. You promised me we were safe. You promised me we were untouchable. Bradley just sat there taking the physical blows, taking the verbal abuse, too paralyzed by the reality of an impending federal indictment to even raise his arms in his own defense. He was a hollow man, entirely broken by his own greed. Patricia was not screaming. Patricia was suffocating. She clutched the edge of the heavy mahogany table, her chest heaving in rapid, shallow breaths. She was hyperventilating. Her manicured hands clawed at the polished wood, as if trying to keep herself from falling off the edge of the earth. She was looking wildly around the luxurious executive dining room, but she was not seeing the crystal chandeliers or the gold accents. She was seeing the absolute permanent end of her social existence. She saw the revoked club memberships. She saw the ignored gala invitations. She saw the whispers. She saw the stares. She saw the pity of the women she had spent decades looking down upon. The country club queen was dead. She was entirely, completely, irrevocably dead. Her status was gone, and without her status she was nothing. I turned my attention away from the hysterical women and focused on Marcus. The commanding patriarch had dissolved. He sank back into his heavy leather chair, looking as though he had aged 20 years in the span of 2 minutes. The vibrant, arrogant red flush had left his face, leaving behind a gray, sagging mask of total defeat. His broad shoulders slouched, his hands shook uncontrollably on the armrests. He looked up at me, and to my absolute disgust, I saw tears welling in his eyes. He was shifting tactics. The tyrant was dead and the victim was born. "You are destroying your own family, Aaliyah," he whispered, a single tear rolling down his wrinkled cheek. He reached a trembling hand out across the table toward me. His voice wavered, thick with manufactured sorrow. "We made mistakes. We made terrible mistakes, but we are your blood. How could you do this to us? How could you take our home? How could you be so utterly heartless?" I looked at his outstretched hand. I did not move. I did not blink. I felt the cold, familiar armor lock into place around my chest. The psychological repetition of my childhood, the constant pounding of my unworthiness fueled every word I spoke next. "I learned from the best dad," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register that commanded absolute attention. "I learned from the absolute best. You want to talk about being heartless? Let us talk about my high school graduation. You handed me a crumpled $2 transit ticket. You handed me a piece of paper and told me to buy my own dessert to celebrate. You told me the family budget was tight. You told me I needed to learn financial independence. You told me to walk home in the rain while you funded a liar's lifestyle. You paid for Jasmine's luxury car that exact same week. You paid for her designer wardrobe. You paid for the lies she told and the academic failures she hid. You funded her delusion. You starved my reality. You built this exact moment, Dad. You built it piece by piece. You built it dollar by dollar. You built it rejection by rejection. You taught me how to be ruthless, and now you are weeping because the student finally surpassed the teacher. Marcus dropped his hand. He closed his eyes, unable to look at the monster he had meticulously created. He shrank back into his chair, a defeated, broken old man. He knew I was right. He knew there was no mercy left in me because he had carved every last ounce of it out himself. Then the harsh scraping of a chair dragged my attention back to the other side of the long table. Bradley was moving. The arrogant alpha male who had just threatened me with the full force of the Securities and Exchange Commission was completely gone. He stumbled out of his chair, his expensive tailored suit wrinkling as his legs gave out. He did not just ask for mercy, he begged for it. He dropped to his knees right there on the plush Persian carpet of the Oakwood Country Club. "Aaliyah, please." Bradley stammered, his voice, a pathetic, high-pitched whine. He crawled forward slightly, his manicured fingers grasping the polished edge of the table. "Please do not report the forgery. Please do not send those documents. I will do anything. I will sign anything. I will give you anything you want. I will transfer my remaining assets. If you give those ledgers to the federal regulators, I will go to prison. I will go to a federal penitentiary, Aaliyah. Please. I have a career. I have a life. You cannot do this to me. You cannot take my freedom." I looked down at the man who had mocked me for years. I looked at the man who had laughed at my cheap clothes and dismissed my intelligence. I looked at the man crawling on the floor like a desperate trapped animal. I placed my hands flat on the table. I pushed my chair back slowly, deliberately. I stood up. I stood up, and I towered over the man kneeling on the floor. I looked down at him, my expression completely devoid of a single ounce of pity. Bradley was weeping. Actual tears stained his perfectly moisturized face. The man who had spent the last 5 years terrorizing junior analysts and mocking my career path was now actively begging for his freedom on his hands and knees. The contrast between his expensive Italian wool suit and his pathetic groveling posture was striking. I let him stay down there. I let him feel the coarse fibers of the expensive Persian rug against his palms. I wanted him to absorb the absolute finality of his situation before I offered him the single narrow exit I had constructed. I reached back into the gray folder and withdrew a final stack of stapled legal documents. I tossed them onto the table so they landed right at the edge near his face. "I will make you exactly one offer, Bradley," I stated, my voice echoing coldly in the vast space. "I will not negotiate. I will not debate. You will listen to my terms, and you will accept them immediately, or I will dial the federal authorities before you can stand up. These documents transfer every single remaining share of your investment firm directly to my holding trust. They authorize the immediate liquidation of your personal portfolio to cover the initial penalties of the margin call you triggered. You are signing away your firm. You are signing away your accounts. You and Jasmine walk away with absolutely nothing. In exchange, I lock the SEC dossier in my private vault. The federal prosecutors never receive the IP logs proving your offshore crypto fraud. You lose your money, but you keep your freedom." Bradley did not hesitate. He did not ask to read the terms. He did not ask for his lawyer, who had already fled the building. He lunged upward, grabbing the edge of the mahogany table to pull himself up just enough to reach the silver pen. His hands were shaking so violently, he could barely hold the barrel. He flipped to the signature pages, his breath coming in ragged, gasping heaves. Jasmine realized what was happening a second too late. She saw him putting pen to paper, trading her lavish lifestyle for his own personal salvation. "Bradley." "No," she screamed, lunging forward and grabbing his arm. "You cannot sign that. You cannot give her everything. We will have nothing left." Bradley shoved her away with a sudden, desperate burst of strength. "Shut up, Jasmine," he hissed, his voice cracking. "Do you want me to go to federal prison? Do you want me in a cage for 20 years? I am signing it. It is done. He frantically scribbled his name across 4 different signature lines. The nib of the silver pen scratched harshly against the thick parchment paper, tearing slightly on the final stroke, because his hands were trembling so badly. He pushed the papers across the table toward me, leaving them smeared with his sweat. I calmly picked up the documents, checking each signature line with forensic precision. They were legally binding. The transfer was complete. Jasmine collapsed into her chair, weeping into her hands, mourning the immediate death of her luxury cars, her designer handbags, and her empty high society existence. Then Patricia moved. The reality of the mortgage transfer had finally bypassed her shock and registered in her mind. She pushed herself up from the table, her face entirely drained of blood. She stumbled around the edge of the heavy mahogany wood, completely ignoring her weeping daughter and her ruined son-in-law. She stopped 2 feet away from me. She did not drop to her knees like Bradley, but her posture was entirely broken. She was clasping her hands together in front of her chest, her knuckles white. "Please, Aaliyah?" Patricia begged, her voice a high, thin whisper that sounded like tearing silk. "You cannot take the house. We have lived in the Oakwood estate for 30 years. It is our legacy. What will the church say? What will the country club say? We are hosting the winter charity gala next month. You cannot leave us homeless. You cannot do this to our reputation." I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel like an unwanted guest in my own home. I looked at her perfectly styled hair and her authentic pearls, and I felt absolutely nothing but cold satisfaction. "They will say you finally got what you deserved," I replied, keeping my gaze locked onto her panicked eyes. "Do you remember my high school graduation party, Patricia? You hosted it right here in this exact country club. But you did not invite my friends. You did not invite my teachers. You invited your board members and the mayor. And when my dress did not meet your ridiculous standards of high fashion, you made me sit in the kitchen with the catering staff so I would not ruin your photographs. You cared more about what the club members thought than you cared about your own daughter. Now you can explain to those exact same club members why your credit cards are declining and why you are being evicted." Patricia covered her mouth with her hands, a choked sob escaping her throat. She looked back at Marcus, pleading for him to intervene, pleading for the powerful patriarch to save them. But Marcus was staring blankly at the far wall, a ghost trapped in his own ruined empire. He had nothing left to say. He had no power left to wield. I gathered the crisp white documents from the table. The IP logs, the transfer agreements, the mortgage deeds. I tapped the edges against the mahogany wood, aligning the papers perfectly before sliding them back into the gray folder. I placed the folder inside my sleek leather briefcase. I closed the lid of the briefcase and snapped the twin metal locks shut. The sharp metallic clicks echoed through the dead silent room like the final nails being driven into a coffin. I picked up the briefcase by its handle and adjusted the cuffs of my blazer. I looked at the 4 shattered people sitting around the table. "Have a great Christmas," I said, my voice light and completely devoid of empathy. "I hear the local motel out by the interstate has a lovely holiday buffet." I turned my back on them and walked out of the executive dining room, leaving the heavy mahogany doors wide open as I strode down the plush carpeted hallway of the country club. 6 months is exactly how long it takes to scrub the rot out of a corporate entity. 6 months to dismantle an empire built on fraud. 6 months to rebuild a legacy built on absolute, unbreakable integrity. I sat at the head of the heavy mahogany table in the primary executive boardroom. It was the exact same table where Bradley had begged for his freedom. It was the exact same room where Marcus had wept for his lost power. But the name etched into the frosted glass doors was no longer his. Horizon Apex Holdings was officially mine. I had audited every single ledger. I had fired every single complicit executive. I had restructured the entire commercial real estate debt portfolio, turning a toxic liability into the most profitable quarter the firm had seen in a decade. They respected my mind here. They respected my precision. They respected the fact that I never missed a single decimal point. Across the city, the reality of their new existence was settling in like wet concrete. Marcus and Patricia were no longer hosting winter charity galas. They were no longer walking past the velvet ropes of the Oakwood Country Club. They were living in a small two-bedroom apartment in a complex that smelled faintly of boiled cabbage and old carpet. Patricia spent her mornings clipping coupons from the Sunday paper. She spent her afternoons staring blankly at the peeling linoleum floor of a cramped kitchen. She traded her authentic pearls for acrylic sweaters. She traded her high society gossip for the deafening silence of social exile. Nobody called, nobody visited, nobody cared. Her country club friends completely erased her from their contact lists the exact moment the eviction notice went public. Marcus rarely left the worn fabric recliner in their tiny living room. He watched daytime television with vacant, empty eyes. He was a king without a kingdom. He was a tyrant without subjects. He was exactly what he had always been underneath the expensive suits, nothing. The golden couple did not survive the loss of their gold. Jasmine filed for divorce the very second Bradley transferred his shares. She thought she could salvage her lifestyle by cutting him loose. She thought she could take half of his hidden offshore accounts. She was completely unaware that I had already drained the corporate equity to cover the legal liabilities. She walked away with absolute zero. Bradley walked away with less. He traded his Italian wool suits for a stiff polyester uniform. He traded his corner office for a grease-stained drive-through window at a regional fast food chain. The federal regulatory boards had stripped him of every single financial license he possessed. He could not trade. He could not consult. He could not even manage a basic retail cash register without strict supervision. Every time he handed a paper bag of fries to a customer, he had to look down at his bare, unmanicured hands and remember the $4 million empire he traded away to stay out of a federal cage. He traded his arrogance for a minimum wage paycheck. He traded his pride for an apron. I did not keep the money just to hoard it. I did not seize power just to sit on a throne. I used it to build armor. The afternoon sun was blindingly bright as I stood on the raised wooden stage outside a massive, newly renovated brick building in the heart of the city. A brilliant silk ribbon stretched across the front entrance. I held a pair of oversized ceremonial scissors in my hands. The crowd gathered below the stage was not filled with sleazy corporate mediators or arrogant hedge fund managers. The crowd was filled with bright, ambitious young African American girls. They were holding notebooks. They were holding coding manuals. They were holding their heads high. I looked out at their expectant faces. I looked at the next generation of leaders. Welcome to the Vanguard Institute of Financial Literacy and Technology. I announced, my voice projecting clearly over the cheering crowd. I allocated a massive portion of my private trust to fund this center entirely. We will teach you how to read a balance sheet. We will teach you how to write software architecture. We will teach you how to dissect a corporate contract. You will learn the mechanics of wealth. You will learn the architecture of power. You will never be financially manipulated. You will never be sidelined. You will never be told that your mind is worth less than someone else's ego. I snipped the heavy silk ribbon. The fabric fell away and the crowd erupted into genuine, joyful applause. My colleagues from the firm were standing in the front row clapping loudly. Sarah, the forensic auditor who helped me trace Bradley's offshore accounts, gave me a proud salute. They were my actual allies. They respected me for my intelligence. They valued me for my resilience. They did not care about the balance in my bank account. They cared about the caliber of my character. Later that evening, the city grew quiet. I sat alone in my new corner office overlooking the glittering downtown skyline. The office was quiet. The office was peaceful. I walked around the massive mahogany desk and took my seat. I did not look at the quarterly earnings reports. I did not look at the acquisition portfolios. I looked at a small, sleek silver frame resting perfectly in the center of the polished wood. Inside the frame, resting behind anti-reflective glass, was a crumpled, faded $2 transit ticket. A cheap piece of paper that was supposed to be a punishment. A cheap piece of paper that was supposed to remind me of my place. A cheap piece of paper that birthed an absolute titan. I reached out and traced my manicured fingernail along the silver edge of the frame. I thought about Marcus sitting in his cramped apartment. I thought about Patricia clipping her coupons. I thought about Bradley smelling like cheap fryer grease. I thought about the hundreds of young girls who would walk through the doors of my institute tomorrow morning armed with the knowledge to conquer the world. I smiled. A genuine, radiant smile that reached my eyes. The perfect, sweet revenge was never just about destroying the people who tried to break me. The perfect, sweet revenge was proving that my worth was always immeasurable. The ultimate lesson from this narrative is that your inherent worth is never defined by the toxic people who attempt to repeatedly belittle you. When individuals prioritize superficial social status, wealth, and public image over genuine human connection and basic empathy, they construct a fragile foundation destined to collapse. Arrogance is a severe vulnerability, not a strength. True power belongs only to those who cultivate real competence, maintain their independence, and operate with meticulous integrity. Holding the moral high ground and refusing to remain a victim will ultimately dismantle toxic family dynamics. Unbreakable integrity will always outlast deceit and manipulation. If you have ever reclaimed your power from a toxic environment, share your story of triumph in the comments below.